Hello there, sleepy hearts. Tonight, beneath the whisper of ancient trees and the glow of a crescent moon, we'll walk beside Elena Gilbert through her extraordinary journey. A girl who lost everything, found love in darkness, and discovered that humanity isn't about what you are, but who you choose to be. From the depths of Wickery Bridge to the heights of impossible love, through transformation and sacrifice, through death and rebirth. This is her story. So, let's get cozy now. Close your eyes. Breathe in very slowly and drift into a world where the heart chooses its own path and dreams never end. May 23rd, 2009. A date that would mark the end of one life and the beginning of another. Though Elena Gilbert didn't know it yet, as she sat in the back seat of her parents' car, earbuds in, lost in music and the comfortable certainty of 17 years old. The Gilbert family sedan moved through the darkness along a winding road Elena had travelled 1,000 times before. Her father, Grayson Gilbert, drove with the careful precision of a doctor accustomed to making life or death decisions. Beside him, Miranda Gilbert looked out the window at the trees rushing past, one hand absently touching the necklace at her throat. In the back seat, Elena scrolled through her phone, half paying attention to the familiar landscape of Mystic Falls, Virginia, the small town that had been her entire world. They were returning from a school function, something forgettable, something ordinary. Later, Elena would struggle to remember what had been so important that all three of them needed to attend. The memory would blur and fade, overshadowed by what came after, by the moment when everything changed in the space between heartbeats. Wickery Bridge appeared ahead, its old wooden structure spanning the dark water below. The bridge had been part of Mystic Falls for over a century, a historical landmark that the town council kept promising to renovate but never quite got around to replacing. It was sturdy enough, safe enough, a piece of living history that tourists photographed and locals took for granted, until it wasn't safe at all. The car hit something, or something hit the car. The specifics would remain unclear, lost in the chaos of screeching tires and Miranda's sharp cry of alarm. Grayson wrenched the steering wheel, trying to maintain control. But the bridge was narrow and the momentum too great, and the laws of physics cared nothing for a father's desperate attempt to protect his family. The sedan crashed through the wooden railing with a sound like thunder, and then they were airborne for one impossible moment, suspended between road and water, between before and after. Elena felt a weightlessness in her stomach, that sensation like the peak of a roller coaster, and her mind had just enough time to think this isn't happening before gravity reasserted itself and they plunged into the water below. The impact was immediate and brutal. Eleanor's head cracked against something hard and the world went dim and spinning. Water poured in through windows that had shattered on impact, cold and relentless, flooding the interior with terrifying speed. The car sank nose first, tilting at an angle that sent loose items sliding toward the dashboard, the engine pulling them down into the murky depths. Elena's ears rang. Her vision swam. She tasted copper in her mouth and realized distantly that she was bleeding, though from where she couldn't determine. The seatbelt held her pinned as water rose around her, covering her legs, her waist, climbing toward her chest with inexorable patience. "Elena." Her mother's voice, sharp with terror, cut through the ringing in Elena's ears. "Elena, can you hear me?" "Mom?" Elena managed, her voice sounding strange and distant. "Mom, I can't. The seatbelt." Grayson was moving, already working to free himself, his doctor's training making him assess and prioritize even in the midst of catastrophe. But the water was rising so fast, and the car was sinking deeper, and Elena could see in her father's eyes the moment he understood they might not all make it out. Then there was someone else, a figure diving through the shattered windshield, moving through the water with impossible grace and speed. A young man with dark hair and eyes that caught what little light penetrated the murky river. He reached for Elena first, his hands working at her seatbelt with preternatural strength. "Wait," Grayson said, his voice urgent, commanding. "Save Elena. Get her out first." The young man hesitated, his eyes meeting Grayson's through the water-filled cabin. Some wordless communication passed between them, some understanding that tore at Elena's chest, even through her semi-conscious haze. "Please," Grayson said, "save my daughter." The stranger nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, and then Elena was being pulled from the sinking car, the seatbelt torn away, strong arms wrapping around her torso. She tried to struggle, tried to reach back for her parents, but the stranger held her firmly, swimming toward the surface with powerful strokes that covered the distance in seconds. They broke the surface and Elena gasped, choking on air and water, her lungs burning. The stranger swam with her toward the shore, moving with a speed and endurance no normal person should possess. He deposited her on the muddy bank with surprising gentleness, and Eleanor's hands clawed at the earth, coughing up river water, her entire body shaking. "My parents," she managed between coughs. "You have to, please." But the stranger was already diving back in, disappearing beneath the dark water. Elena watched from the bank, her vision blurring with tears and river water and the blood that ran into her eyes from a cut somewhere on her scalp. She counted seconds, then minutes, waiting for 3 figures to emerge from the river. Only one came back. The young man surfaced alone, his face stricken with something that looked like grief, like guilt, like the weight of an impossible choice. He swam to shore and pulled himself out, water streaming from his clothes, and Elena knew before he spoke what he was going to say. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion that seemed too raw, too real for a stranger. "I tried. I went back for them, but the car, it was too deep, too fast. I couldn't reach them in time. I'm so sorry." Elena stared at him, at this impossible stranger who had saved her life and let her parents drown, and she couldn't make sense of it, couldn't process the enormity of what he was telling her. Her parents were still down there, in the car, in the water, and this stranger was here on the bank with her, and nothing about that made sense. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone had seen the car go over, had called for help, but help was coming too late, would arrive to find a tragedy already complete, a family destroyed, a girl orphaned by the cold waters of Wickery Bridge. The stranger looked at Elena with eyes that held too much knowledge, too much pain. "I'm sorry," he said again, and then he was gone, vanishing into the trees with the same impossible speed he'd shown in the water, leaving Elena alone on the muddy bank to wait for the emergency responders who would tell her what she already knew. Her parents were dead, and she was alive, and she would never understand why the stranger had chosen to save her instead of them, why her father had ordered him to leave them behind, why she was sitting here breathing when Grayson and Miranda Gilbert would never breathe again. The stranger's name, she would learn later, was Stefan Salvatore, and his choice to honor her father's dying wish to save Elena first and only Elena would haunt both of them for years to come. But that knowledge came later. In the immediate aftermath, Elena knew only grief and confusion and the terrible guilt of survival. The paramedics arrived and wrapped her in blankets, checked her pupils, bandaged the cut on her head. They asked her questions she couldn't answer about what happened, about how she got out, about whether there was anyone else in the car. "My parents," she said, her voice hollow. "My parents are still down there." The divers went in. They brought up the bodies an hour later, Grayson and Miranda Gilbert, still in the car, the doctor and his wife, who had dedicated their lives to helping others, now just casualties of a tragic accident on a bridge that should have been replaced years ago. Elena watched from the ambulance, wrapped in blankets that couldn't stop her shaking, and she understood in that moment that her life had just divided into before and after. Before the bridge, after the bridge, before she was an orphan, after she became one. The funeral was 3 days later. Elena stood in the cemetery in a black dress that Aunt Jenna had bought for her, because Elena's entire wardrobe was still covered in river water and mud and the smell of death. She stood between her younger brother Jeremy and her Aunt Jenna, watching 2 coffins being lowered into the ground, and she felt nothing. The grief was too big to process, too overwhelming to feel, so instead, there was just numbness, a cotton wool distance between Elena and the rest of the world. People came by to offer condolences, friends, neighbors, her parents' colleagues from the hospital. They said things that were meant to be comforting but only highlighted the enormity of what had been lost. They're in a better place. At least they went together. "You're so strong, Elena." She wasn't strong. She was empty. There was a difference. Jeremy stood beside her, his own grief manifesting as anger, as withdrawal, as the beginning of what would become a serious drug problem. He blamed Elena, she could tell, though he never said it out loud. Blamed her for being the one who lived, for being the one their father had chosen to save. The guilt of that knowledge sat heavy in Elena's chest, another weight she didn't know how to carry. Aunt Jenna did her best. Miranda's younger sister had always been the fun aunt, the irresponsible one who showed up for birthdays and holidays but wasn't really equipped to raise 2 traumatized teenagers. But she stepped up because there was no one else, moving into the Gilbert house, taking guardianship of her niece and nephew, trying to fill shoes that were far too big for her. The summer after the accident blurred together in Elena's memory. 4 months of grief and guilt and desperate attempts to feel normal again. She went through the motions of living, eating, sleeping, breathing. But it was all performance, all pretense. Inside she was still underwater, still watching her parents sink into darkness, still hearing her father's voice. Save Elena. She wrote in her journal, a habit she'd inherited from her mother. Long entries about the accident, about the stranger who had saved her, about the impossible choice her father had made. She wrote about missing her parents, about the hole they'd left in her life, about how wrong it felt to be alive when they were dead. Jeremy spiraled. Elena watched helplessly as her brother turned to drugs, seeking oblivion in pills and powder, chasing numbness the way Elena chased normalcy. They barely spoke to each other, these two siblings bound by shared tragedy but separated by individual grief. The house that had once been full of warmth and laughter became a mausoleum, each of them haunting different rooms, avoiding the spaces where memories lived too vividly. But Elena had been the perfect daughter, the golden girl, and she couldn't let herself fall apart the way Jeremy did. Someone had to hold it together. Someone had to be okay for Aunt Jenna's sake, for the teachers who watched her with concerned eyes, for the friends who didn't know how to talk to her anymore. So she decided to try, decided that when school started, she would return to her life, would be Elena Gilbert again instead of just a ghost wearing her face. She would be the cheerleader, the good student, the responsible one. She would smile and laugh and pretend that everything was fine, because the alternative, letting the grief consume her the way it was consuming Jeremy, was too terrifying to consider. She didn't know that summer about the supernatural world lurking beneath Mystic Falls' picturesque surface. Didn't know about vampires and werewolves and witches. Didn't know that the stranger who saved her was something more than human, or that his choice to honor her father's wish would draw her into a world of darkness and danger and impossible love. She didn't know that she looked exactly like a woman named Catherine Pierce, a vampire who had terrorized Mystic Falls 145 years earlier. Didn't know about the Petrova bloodline, about doppelgangers, about ancient curses that required her blood. Elena Gilbert thought she was just a girl who had survived a tragedy, who was trying to rebuild a normal life from the wreckage. She thought her biggest challenges would be managing her grief, helping Jeremy, passing her classes, maintaining friendships that felt strained and fragile. She had no idea that when school started, when she returned to Mystic Falls High for her junior year, she would meet the stranger from the bridge again. Had no idea that Stefan Salvatore would change everything, would open her eyes to a world she never knew existed, would make her question everything she thought she understood about life and death and the space between. The summer ended. September arrived. Elena stood in front of her closet, picking out an outfit for the first day of school, and she made a promise to herself. She would try. She would move forward. She would live because her parents had died to give her that chance, and wasting it felt like the worst betrayal imaginable. She looked at herself in the mirror. Brown hair, brown eyes, average height, nothing particularly special. And she didn't see the doppelganger, the Petrova descendant, the girl whose blood would be coveted by ancient vampires and werewolves and hybrids. She just saw Elena, 17 years old, orphaned, grieving, trying to be okay. Tomorrow, school would start. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Stefan Salvatore would walk into her life again, and the supernatural world would claim her as his own. But tonight, Elena Gilbert was still just a girl writing in her journal, trying to make sense of loss, believing that the worst had already happened. She had survived Wickery Bridge. Nothing could be harder than that. She was wrong, but she didn't know it yet. The first day of school arrived with typical late summer heat, the kind that made the air thick and heavy even in the early morning. Elena stood in front of her mirror, smoothing down the purple top she'd chosen, studying her reflection with critical eyes. She looked normal, presentable, like a girl who had her life together, who wasn't held together by willpower and performance. The cemetery seemed like the right place to start. Elena had developed a habit over the summer of visiting her parents' graves before facing difficult days, talking to them as if they could hear, as if their silence was comfort rather than absence. She walked through the wrought iron gates into the old Mystic Falls Cemetery, past weathered headstones dating back to the 1800s, past the history that permeated every corner of this town. She didn't expect to find someone else there, didn't expect to see a young man standing among the graves, dark-haired and impossibly still, writing in a journal of his own. He looked up as she approached, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was him, the stranger from the bridge, the one who had saved her and let her parents die. "Hi," he said, his voice quiet, carefully neutral. "I'm Stefan Salvatore. I didn't mean to intrude. This seemed like a good place to think, to write." Elena stared at him, her mind racing through a dozen questions, a dozen accusations. But what came out was simply, "You saved me." Something flickered in Stefan's eyes, recognition, guilt, a complex emotion Elena couldn't quite pass. "I'm sorry. That night, the bridge, you pulled me out of the car." Elena's voice was steady, despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "You saved my life." Stefan's expression shifted, and Elena saw the truth in his face even before he spoke. He had been there, he remembered, and he had come to Mystic Falls knowing she was here, knowing they would meet again. "Your father told me to save you," Stefan said quietly. "He made me promise. I tried to go back for them, but—" "I know," Elena interrupted, not wanting to hear the excuses, the explanations that wouldn't change anything. "I know you tried. I needed to say thank you. Even though it feels wrong to be grateful when they're dead, it doesn't feel wrong," Stefan said. "It feels impossible. Everything about that night was impossible." They stood in the cemetery, two people bound by tragedy, and Elena felt something shift in the air between them. A connection she couldn't explain, a recognition that went deeper than the shared trauma of Wickery Bridge. Looking at Stefan Salvatore, Elena felt seen in a way she hadn't since before the accident, as if he understood the weight she carried without her having to explain it. "I should go," Elena said, though she found herself reluctant to leave. "School starts in 20 minutes. I'll be there," Stefan said. "I just enrolled. Junior year." Elena nodded, processing this information, the coincidence that didn't feel coincidental at all. "Then I'll see you there." She walked away, feeling his eyes on her back, feeling the pull to turn around, to stay, to ask all the questions crowding her throat. But she kept walking, kept moving forward, because that was what she'd promised herself she would do. At school, Elena slipped back into her role with practiced ease. She smiled at Caroline Forbes, her best friend whose energy and enthusiasm had felt exhausting all summer, but now felt almost comforting in its normalcy. she hugged Bonnie Bennett, her other best friend, whose quiet support had been one of the few things that helped during the worst days. She waved at Matty, Donovan, her ex-boyfriend, the relationship that had ended amicably before the accident, but still held warmth in history. "There's a new student," Caroline said immediately, her eyes bright with gossip and speculation. "Stefan Salvatore. He's mysterious and brooding and absolutely gorgeous. I'm calling dibs." Elena felt something twist in her chest at Caroline's casual claim, a possessiveness she had no right to feel. "I met him this morning, in the cemetery." "The cemetery?" Bonnie's eyebrows rose. "That's specific." "He was writing in a journal," Elena said. "It seemed peaceful, not creepy." "Everything about him seems creepy to me," Bonnie said, and there was something in her voice that made Elena pause. Bonnie had always been intuitive, sensitive to things other people missed. Her grandmother was involved in the town's historical society, always talking about old families and older secrets. "There's something off about him. I can't explain it, but I feel it." Before Elena could respond, Stefan appeared in the hallway and the conversation died. Caroline immediately brightened, moving toward him with predatory enthusiasm. Elena watched as Caroline introduced herself, watched Stefan's polite but distant responses, watched the way his eyes kept finding Elena across the crowded hallway. The day progressed in a blur of classes and reunions, of teachers offering sympathetic looks and classmates who didn't know how to act around her anymore. Elena maintained her smile, her composure, the performance of normalcy that was becoming second nature. But her attention kept drifting to Stefan, to the way he moved through the school like a ghost, present, but not quite part of things, watching everything with eyes that held too much knowledge. In history class, Stefan sat behind Elena, and she felt hyper-aware of his presence, of the way he seemed to know things before the teacher said them, answering questions with a precision that suggested personal experience rather than textbook knowledge. When they discussed the Civil War, Stefan's jaw tightened, and Elena wondered what memories the topic stirred, what personal history lurked behind his carefully neutral expression. After school, Elena found Stefan waiting by her car, and her heart did something complicated in her chest at the sight of him. "I need to talk to you," Stefan said, "about the bridge, about why I was there." "Okay," Elena said, though every instinct screamed that this conversation would change things, would open doors she might not be able to close. They drove to the boarding house on the edge of town, a sprawling historical property that had been in the Salvatore family for over a century. Stefan led Elena inside, through rooms filled with antique furniture and old portraits, to a study lined with books that looked like they belonged in a museum. "I need you to keep an open mind," Stefan said, his voice tight with tension. "What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to listen." Elena sat down on an ancient leather sofa, her hands folded in her lap, and waited. She had survived the impossible already. What was one more impossibility? "I'm a vampire," Stefan said, the words dropping into the silence like stones into still water. Elena stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for the laugh that would indicate this was some elaborate joke. But Stefan's expression remained serious, almost pained, and slowly Elena understood he meant it. He actually meant it. "Vampires aren't real," Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. Because if vampires weren't real, How had Stefan moved so fast in the water? How had he torn through her seatbelt with his bare hands? How had he vanished from the riverbank without a trace? "We are," Stefan said quietly. "I was born in 1851. I was turned into a vampire in 1864 during the Battle of Willow Creek, right here in Mystic Falls. I've been 17 years old for over 140 years." Elena's mind raced, trying to reconcile this impossible information with the young man standing in front of her. "Prove it," she said, because she needed to see, needed concrete evidence that would make this insanity real. Stefan moved, and suddenly he was across the room, a blur of motion too fast for Elena's eyes to track. Then he was back in front of her, and his eyes had changed, veins darkening beneath them, his canines elongating into fangs that looked sharp enough to tear flesh. Elena's breath caught, fear flooding her system, every survival instinct screaming at her to run. But she stayed frozen, watching as Stefan's face returned to normal, as the monster receded behind the mask of humanity. "I don't hurt people," Stefan said quickly, reading the fear in Elena's expression. "I drink animal blood. I've spent over a century learning to control the urge to feed on humans. I'm not dangerous to you, Elena. I would never hurt you." "But you could," Elena said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You could kill me without even trying." "Yes," Stefan admitted. "But I won't. I swear to you, I won't." Elena stood on shaking legs, moving to the window, needing distance to process what she'd just learned. The world had just expanded in ways her mind struggled to comprehend. Vampires were real. The supernatural existed. Everything she thought she knew about reality had just been proven wrong. "Why were you at the bridge that night?" Elena asked, not turning around. "Why were you there to save me?" Stefan was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I saw you earlier that day, at the school, and you looked exactly like someone I used to know, a woman named Catherine Pierce. She was a vampire, and I loved her 145 years ago. When I saw you, I thought you were her somehow, that she'd come back, so I followed your family, trying to understand. And when the car went into the water, I couldn't let you die. Even if you weren't Catherine, I couldn't let you drown." Elena turned, looking at Stefan with new understanding. "I look like her? Like this Catherine?" "Exactly like her," Stefan said. "It's impossible, but you're identical. Same face, same hair, same eyes. You're her doppelganger." The word hung between them, heavy with implications Elena didn't yet understand. A doppelganger, a duplicate, someone who existed as a copy of someone else, as if Elena Gilbert was less a person and more an echo of this vampire woman from the past. "Is that why you're here?" Elena asked, and she hated the way her voice trembled. "Because I look like your dead girlfriend." "She's not dead," Stefan said. "She's in a tomb beneath the old church, along with other vampires who were trapped there in 1864. At least, I thought she was. I came to Mystic Falls because I saw you, and I needed to understand how you could exist when Catherine was supposed to be entombed. But then I got to know you, Elena, and you're nothing like Catherine. You're kind where she was cruel. You're genuine where she was manipulative. You're yourself, not a copy of anyone." Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that she was more than just a replacement for a lost love. But the timing felt too convenient, the connection too neat. Stefan had saved her because she looked like Catherine. Everything between them was built on that foundation of mistaken identity. "I need time," Elena said, "to process this, to figure out what it means." "Of course," Stefan said. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Elena left the boarding house in a daze, driving home on autopilot, her mind spinning with impossible information. Vampires existed. Stefan was over 160 years old. She looked exactly like someone he'd loved in the 1800s. The supernatural world was real, and she'd just been dragged into it without warning or preparation. At home, she found Jeremy in his room, high on something that made his eyes glassy and distant. Aunt Jenna was out, probably on a date, trying to maintain some semblance of her own life while raising her sister's children. Elena stood in the doorway of Jeremy's room, looking at her brother, and felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on her shoulders. "Are you okay?" she asked, knowing the answer but needing to ask anyway. "Perfect," Jeremy slurred. "Everything's perfect." Elena closed his door and went to her own room, pulling out her journal, needing to write, to process, to make sense of the day that had just shattered her understanding of reality. But before she could write a word, her phone rang. Caroline's voice was bright with excitement. "Elena, there's a party at the grill tonight. You have to come. You've been hibernating all summer, and it's time to rejoin the living." The irony of that phrasing wasn't lost on Elena, given what she'd just learned. But Caroline didn't know about vampires, didn't know that the phrase "the living" now had specific meaning that excluded certain beautiful, impossible boys. "I don't know," Elena said. "I'm tired. Please," Caroline begged. "We miss you. Bonnie misses you. Matt misses you. Just one drink, 1 hour, and then you can go home and hermit again." Elena sighed, recognizing that Caroline wouldn't give up until she agreed. "Fine, 1 hour." The grill was crowded with students celebrating the first day of school, the noise and energy overwhelming after Elena's quiet summer. She found Bonnie and Caroline at a booth, accepted the drink Caroline pushed into her hand, and tried to pretend everything was normal. But then Stefan walked in, and normalcy became impossible. He moved through the crowd with that preternatural grace, and Elena saw Caroline's face light up with interest, saw Matt's expression darken with masculine competition, saw Bonnie's unease deepen into something close to fear. Stefan's eyes found Elena's across the room, and in that moment, she made a decision. She could run from this, could pretend vampires didn't exist, could try to go back to her normal life, or she could step forward into the impossible, could embrace the supernatural world that had claimed her, could choose the connection she felt with Stefan, despite all the reasons it was dangerous and wrong. Elena stood, walking towards Stefan with her heart pounding, aware of every eye tracking her movement. When she reached him, she looked up into those eyes that had seen more than a century of history, and she spoke the words that would seal her fate. "Tell me everything," Elena said, "about vampires, about Catherine, about this world I never knew existed. I want to know all of it." Stefan's expression shifted into something like relief, like gratitude, like hope. "Are you sure? Once you know everything, you can't unknow it. Your life will never be the same." "My life already changed," Elena said. "The night my parents died, the night you saved me. Nothing has been the same since then. So tell me the truth, Stefan. All of it." And he did. Over the following days and weeks, Stefan became Elena's guide into the supernatural world. He explained the rules of vampire existence, the need for blood, the vulnerability to sunlight without a protective ring, the invitation required to enter homes, the wooden stakes and vervain that could harm them. He told her about his brother Damon, older and more dangerous, who would be coming to Mystic Falls with his own agenda. He explained about Catherine, about the tomb, about the history that bound him to this town. Elena absorbed it all, this impossible education, and found herself falling for Stefan in ways that terrified and thrilled her. He was dangerous, yes. He was a vampire who could kill her without effort. But he was also the boy who had honored her father's dying wish, who drank animal blood to avoid hurting humans, who looked at her and saw Elena Gilbert rather than Catherine Pierce's doppelganger. But then Damon arrived, and everything became more complicated. Elena met Damon Salvatore on a fog-shrouded night, standing in the middle of the road like an apparition. He was beautiful the way Stefan was beautiful, but where Stefan's beauty was soft and gentle, Damon's was sharp and dangerous. His eyes held cruelty and humor in equal measure, and when he looked at Elena, she felt assessed, measured, found wanting, or perhaps too interesting. "Hello, Elena," Damon said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "I've heard so much about you. The girl who looks like Catherine. Stefan's new obsession. How fascinating." "Damon," Stefan appeared from the darkness, his body tense with protective fury. "Stay away from her." "Why would I do that?" Damon asked, circling Elena like a predator. "She's the most interesting thing to happen in this miserable town in decades. Besides, I want to see for myself if she's really as special as you think, or if she's just another pretty face wearing Catherine's features." Elena felt the danger rolling off Damon in waves, felt the threat implicit in his casual stance. This vampire wasn't controlled like Stefan. This vampire was chaos barely contained, violence wrapped in charm, and he terrified her in ways Stefan never had. "I'm going to open the tomb," Damon said, his attention shifting to Stefan. "I'm going to free Catherine, and nothing you or your little doppelganger can do will stop me." Then he was gone, vanishing into the fog with supernatural speed, leaving Elena and Stefan standing in the road. "That's your brother?" Elena asked, her voice shaky. "That's Damon," Stefan confirmed, "and he's going to be a problem." Elena was beginning to understand that problem was a massive understatement. The supernatural world had claimed her, and there was no going back to the simple life she'd known before. She was the doppelganger, the girl who looked like Catherine Pierce, and that resemblance had made her a target, a pawn in games she didn't yet understand. But standing there with Stefan, feeling the pull toward him despite every rational reason to run, Elena made her choice. She would face this world. She would learn its rules. She would protect the people she loved from the darkness that lurked beneath Mystic Falls' picturesque surface. And she would love Stefan Salvatore, the vampire who had saved her life, even if that love destroyed her in the end. The truth about Elena's origins came in pieces, fragments of a puzzle that grew more disturbing with each revelation. It started with a name found in old adoption records, discovered during what should have been a routine search for her birth certificate. Isabel Fleming, the woman who had given birth to Elena Gilbert 17 years ago and then disappeared, leaving her baby to be raised by Grayson and Miranda Gilbert. Elena stood in her parents' study the adoption papers trembling in her hands, and felt her world tilt on its axis once again. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about her family, about her place in the world, had been built on a foundation of carefully constructed lies. Grayson and Miranda weren't her biological parents. They had adopted her, raised her as their own, loved her completely, but she wasn't theirs by blood. The questions crowded her throat, desperate and unanswerable. Why had her parents never told her? Why had they kept this secret? Who was Isabel Fleming? And why had she given up her baby? And more importantly, how did this connect to the supernatural world that had consumed Elena's life since meeting Stefan Salvatore? Aunt Jenna found Elena in the study, surrounded by papers, tears streaming down her face. The late afternoon sun filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the room, where Elena had done homework with her father, where Miranda had balanced the family accounts, where normal life had existed before everything changed. "Oh, sweetie," Jenna said, her voice thick with sympathy and guilt. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but your parents thought it was better this way. Better if you never knew." "Better?" Elena's voice cracked, years of certainty shattering like glass. How is finding out like this better? How is learning my entire life is a lie supposed to be better? "You were theirs in every way that mattered," Jenna said firmly, kneeling beside Elena's chair, taking her hands with desperate intensity. "Miranda and Grayson loved you more than anything in this world. The adoption didn't change that. You were their daughter, Elena, always. From the moment they held you, you were theirs." But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this secret had deeper implications, that her adoption was connected to the supernatural world that had claimed her. The timing felt too convenient, the connection to vampires too strong. Stefan had said she was Catherine Pierce's doppelganger, an exact duplicate of a woman who had lived in the 1800s. That kind of resemblance didn't happen by accident. That kind of genetic impossibility had to mean something. Elena took the information to Stefan, spreading the adoption papers across the coffee table in the Salvatore boarding house. The old mansion felt oppressive today, its history pressing down on her shoulders, reminding her that secrets in Mystic Falls ran deep as the roots of its ancient trees. "I need to know why I look like Catherine," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "This can't be coincidence. There has to be a reason. My adoption, my resemblance to her, the fact that I exist at all, none of it makes sense unless there's something bigger happening." Stefan's expression was troubled as he studied the documents, his enhanced vision allowing him to read every detail, every notation made by the adoption agency. Isabel Fleming. The name sounds familiar, but I can't place it. There's something about it that rings in my memory, but it's too distant, too vague. "My biological father is listed as unknown," Elena said, pointing to the blank space on the birth certificate with a trembling finger. "But I think I know who he is. John Gilbert, my Uncle John. He's been acting strange around me for months, guilty, like he knows something he's not saying. The way he looks at me sometimes, it's not how an uncle looks at a niece." The confrontation with John Gilbert happened in the same study, where Elena had found the adoption papers, as if the room itself demanded honesty, demanded that family secrets finally be dragged into light. John stood by the window, his back to Elena, his shoulders tense with the weight of nearly 2 decades of deception. "Tell me the truth," Elena demanded, her voice carrying an authority she hadn't known she possessed. Are you my father? John turned slowly, his face lined with guilt and something that might have been regret. Yes, he said simply. Isabel and I were young. We were reckless, and when she got pregnant, neither of us was ready for a child. So you just gave me away. Elena's hands clenched into fists. You let her hand me over to your brother like I was a problem to be solved. It wasn't like that, John said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isabel was obsessed with the supernatural. She researched vampires, studied the old families, became consumed with proving they existed. When she got pregnant, she couldn't handle it. She said motherhood would interfere with her research, with her quest for knowledge. So she asked Grayson and Miranda to adopt you, to give you the normal life she couldn't provide. And you just let her? Elena felt betrayal burning in her chest, hot and acidic. You let her walk away from your daughter. You let me grow up thinking my parents were dead when one of them was living right here in Mystic Falls. I was young and stupid and scared, John said, his voice breaking. And Isabel was persuasive. She said it was better this way, safer. She said there were things about your bloodline that made you valuable, that people would come looking for you if they knew what you were. She made me promise to watch over you from a distance, to protect you without ever claiming you. Elena felt cold dread settling in her stomach, familiar now, this sensation of discovering that her life was even more complicated than she'd imagined. What I am. What does that mean? What's special about my bloodline? John's expression was grim, his face suddenly looking much older than his years. You're a Petrova doppelganger. Catherine Pierce wasn't the original. There was another woman, 500 years ago in Bulgaria, named Tatia Petrova, and before her, others stretching back through history. You're part of an ancient bloodline, Elena. The universe creates you, duplicates of the original Petrova woman, for a specific purpose, and that makes you incredibly dangerous to certain people. It also makes you incredibly valuable. The full truth came from Elijah Mickelson, an original vampire who arrived in Mystic Falls with knowledge that spanned 1,000 years and eyes that held the weight of immortality. He was beautiful in the way all original vampires were beautiful, with an old-world elegance that made Stefan and Damon seem young and rough by comparison. He spoke with careful precision, choosing each word with the deliberation of someone who had learned that words held power, that knowledge could be weapon or shield. The curse of the sun and the moon, Elijah explained, standing in the Salvatore parlor like a professor delivering a lecture on ancient history. For 1,000 years, vampires and werewolves have believed that breaking this curse would free them from their limitations. Vampires would walk in sunlight without fear. Werewolves would control their transformations, choosing when to shift, rather than being slaves to the full moon. Elena sat on the edge of her seat, Stefan beside her, Damon leaning against the wall with calculated casualness that didn't hide his tension. But, Elena prompted, because there was always a but, always a complication. But the curse is a lie, Elijah said. A story my mother created to hide the real curse, the one placed on my brother Klaus. You see, Klaus is unique among vampires. He's a hybrid, born of a werewolf father and a vampire mother, though the vampire transformation came later. When my mother turned us all into vampires to protect us from the werewolves, She suppressed Klaus's werewolf side with a curse. For 1,000 years he's been only vampire, his werewolf nature locked away, inaccessible. And let me guess, Damon interjected, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Breaking this curse requires something specific, something rare, something Elena-shaped. Elijah's slight smile held no humor. Precisely. To break the curse on Klaus, a ritual sacrifice must be performed. A vampire must die, a werewolf must die, and the doppelganger must be drained of her blood, her death releasing the power needed to unlock Klaus's hybrid nature. Elena felt the words settle over her like a shroud, suffocating and final. She wasn't just a girl who looked like Catherine Pierce. She was a cosmic duplicate, created by forces she didn't understand, for the express purpose of dying to benefit a vampire-werewolf hybrid she'd never met. Her entire existence, her birth, her adoption, her resemblance to Catherine, all of it was connected to this ancient curse, this supernatural machinery that had been grinding toward this moment for 500 years. "So I'm meant to die," Elena said quietly, the words not a question, but a statement of fact. "That's what doppelgangers do. We exist to be sacrificed." "Catherine ran," Elijah said. 500 years ago, when she learned of the curse, she fled. She turned herself into a vampire to escape her fate, because vampires cannot be used in the ritual. The doppelganger must be human, must bleed human blood. Catherine's cowardice delayed the ritual for 5 centuries, but Klaus has been searching for the next doppelganger ever since. And now he's found you. Stefan's hand found Elena's, his grip tight with protective fury that vibrated through his entire body. "We won't let that happen. We'll find a way to protect you. We'll kill Klaus if we have to." Elijah's laugh was soft and utterly without amusement. "You cannot kill Klaus. He's an original vampire, over 1,000 years old, impossibly strong and completely ruthless. He survived witch hunts and vampire purges and countless attempts on his life. And when he decides he wants something, he takes it, regardless of who stands in his way." But even as Elijah spoke, Elena saw something flicker in his expression, some hesitation, some crack in his certainty. "Unless," she prompted. "Unless we make a deal," Elijah said slowly. "Klaus wants to break his curse, wants his hybrid nature restored. If we can guarantee him that, give him what he wants, he might agree to spare you afterward. The ritual requires your death, but death isn't always permanent. With the right magic, the right witch, you could die and come back." The revelation of Tyler Lockwood's werewolf heritage added another layer to the impossible situation. Tyler, Elena's friend since childhood, the boy who had thrown footballs in her backyard and attended her birthday parties and made her laugh with his terrible jokes, was part of an ancient curse that bound werewolves to painful transformations with every full moon. Elena watched Tyler struggle with his new reality, saw him grapple with the rage that came with the werewolf curse, the anger that simmered beneath his skin, waiting to explode. His first transformation had been triggered by accidentally killing someone, by taking a life, and the guilt and horror of it had nearly destroyed him. "I'm a monster," Tyler said, his voice rough with self-loathing. And Elena heard echoes of Stefan's words, of the way vampires saw themselves as corrupted, as less than human. "You're not a monster," Elena insisted. "You're Tyler, you're my friend. And you didn't ask for this any more than I asked to be a doppelganger." But the truth was more complicated. Tyler was the werewolf component of Klaus's sacrifice, just as Elena was the doppelganger component. They were both cosmic chess pieces, moved around a board by forces far beyond their control. Caroline's transformation into a vampire, courtesy of Catherine Pierce's cruelty, completed the terrible triangle. Caroline, who had been Eleanor's best friend since elementary school, who had shared her lunch and her secrets and her dreams, was now a vampire. Catherine had fed Caroline her blood, then smothered her with a pillow, forcing the transformation as a message, as a demonstration of power. Elena watched Caroline struggle with her new vampire nature, saw her fight against the bloodlust that Stefan had warned about, the overwhelming desire to feed that consumed newborn vampires. But Caroline was strong, stronger than anyone had given her credit for, and she learned control with a determination that impressed even Damon. "I'm not going to be a monster," Caroline declared, her jaw set with stubborn resolve. "I'm going to be a vampire who helps people, who protects people, like Stefan, not like Damon." "Hey," Damon protested, but there was a hint of a smile in his eyes, a grudging respect for Caroline's fire. A vampire, a werewolf, and a doppelganger, all living in Mystic Falls, all pieces in Klaus's deadly puzzle. The cosmic machinery was aligning, pieces falling into place with terrible inevitability. Catherine's return shattered any illusion of safety Elena might have maintained. The vampire who wore Elena's face walked into the Gilbert house uninvited, because she had been invited in centuries ago when the house was first built by Gilberts, who didn't know they were welcoming a monster. And she smiled with Elena's smile, spoke with a voice identical to Elena's own, moved with Elena's gestures twisted into something cruel and mocking. "Hello, Elena," Catherine said, examining her fingernails with casual disinterest. "I've been looking forward to meeting you, the latest Petrova doppelganger. How does it feel knowing you exist only to die, knowing that your entire life, every moment of it, has been leading to Klaus draining you like a juice box?" Elena stared at her exact duplicate, at this monster who looked like her but lacked any trace of humanity, and felt revulsion crawl up her spine like insects. "You're nothing like me." "Oh, but I am," Catherine purred, moving closer, her face inches from Elena's, so close Elena could feel the unnatural coolness of her skin. "We're the same face, the same blood, the same curse. We're cosmic twins, you and I. The only difference is I was smart enough to run, to survive, to choose immortality over sacrifice. You're foolish enough to stay and face Klaus, to believe that love and friendship will somehow save you. That makes you weak, not noble. It makes you a victim waiting to happen." Catherine's games escalated with each passing day, her cruelty targeting everyone Elena loved with surgical precision. She killed John Gilbert, Eleanor's biological father, who had finally started trying to be a father in truth, with a viciousness that spoke to centuries of pent-up rage. She sliced off his fingers one by one, stabbed him repeatedly, left him bleeding on the kitchen floor for Elena to find. She manipulated Jenna, Elena's beloved aunt, who had given up her own life to raise her sister's children, who had tried so hard to be enough despite her fear and inexperience. Catherine compelled Jenna to stab herself, to suffer, to doubt her own mind and memories. And finally, on the night of the sacrifice, Catherine turned Jenna into a vampire, ensuring she would die in the ritual, that Elena would watch another person she loved be destroyed because of what she was. Through it all, Elena prepared herself for the inevitable. Klaus would come. The sacrifice would happen. And she would die. Because that was what doppelgangers did, had been doing for 500 years, offering their lives to break curses they had no part in creating. Bonnie Bennett, Elena's best friend since childhood, and a powerful witch descended from the Salem line, presented a desperate solution. A spell that would link Elena's life to John Gilbert's, allowing her to die and come back, to satisfy the sacrifice requirements while preserving her life through magical resurrection. It will work, Bonnie insisted, her hands trembling with the weight of what she was proposing. Dark circles under her eyes from days of research and practice. The spell is old, powerful. You'll die, the curse will break, and then you'll wake up. John has agreed to be the anchor, his life for yours. When you die, he'll die in your place permanently, and you'll return. Elena looked at her biological father, at this man who had failed her in so many ways, but was now offering the ultimate sacrifice, and felt something shift in her chest. You don't have to do this. I can't ask you to die for me. You're not asking, John said quietly, his voice steady, despite the fear Elena could see in his eyes. I'm choosing. I've made so many mistakes, Elena. I gave you away when I should have fought to raise you. I let Isabel walk into darkness when I should have stopped her. I've been selfish and cruel and consumed with hatred for vampires, letting my prejudice blind me to the good ones, to Stefan and even sometimes Damon. Let me do this one right thing. Let me save you the way your father, the man who raised you, saved you at Wickery Bridge. Let me be your father, just this once, in the way that matters most. The night of the sacrifice arrived with terrible inevitability. The air thick with supernatural energy, with the weight of ancient magic preparing to remake the world. Klaus, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, orchestrated the ritual with meticulous precision, his movements elegant and deadly, his eyes glowing with anticipation of the power he was about to claim. The location was an old Lockwood property, a clearing where witches had performed rituals for centuries, where the veil between worlds was thin and magic flowed like water. Torches burned in a circle, casting flickering shadows across the assembled victims. Caroline was there, the vampire component, compelled to compliance, tears streaming down her face as she fought against Klaus's control. Tyler was there, the werewolf component, his body already beginning to shift, his fear palpable in the smoke-scented air. And Jenna, transformed against her will mere hours ago, stood as the second vampire required, her humanity still intact enough to understand the horror of what was happening, to recognize Elena and mouth, "I'm sorry," across the clearing. Elena watched Klaus kill Jenna first, staking her heart with casual efficiency, and she screamed against the gag in her mouth, against the restraints holding her to the stone altar. Jenna, who had taken her in after her parents died, who had tried so hard to fill shoes that were too big, who had loved her despite the impossibility of the situation, who had been family when family was all that mattered. Gone in a moment, her body crumbling to ash, her final expression one of love and sorrow. Tyler died next. His neck snapped with supernatural speed, the sound echoing across the clearing like a gunshot. But he would come back. The werewolf curse ensured that, bound him to resurrection as long as he was killed by supernatural means. He would awake in agony, would transform, but he would live. Then Klaus turned to Caroline, and Elena closed her eyes, unable to watch another person die because of her, because of what she was. But Stefan intervened, appearing from the shadows where he'd been hiding, offering himself in Caroline's place, buying her life with a promise to Klaus that made Elena's heart shatter. 10 years, Stefan said, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was offering. I'll serve you for 10 years. I'll be your companion, your enforcer, whatever you need. Just let Caroline go. Let her live. Klaus studied Stefan with interest, with calculation, and then he smiled. A ripper in my service? Oh, that has possibilities. Very well. The vampire Stefan Salvatore will do. The ritual only requires a vampire after all. It doesn't specify which one. Then Klaus's blade was at Elena's throat, and she felt the sharp sting of it cutting into her skin. Felt her blood flowing out in a hot rush that soaked her clothes, pooled beneath her on the stone. The world dimmed, narrowed to a pinpoint of fading consciousness. She heard Klaus's voice, triumphant and terrible, felt the curse breaking with a crack of thunder and supernatural energy that shook the earth. She felt her heart slow, stutter, stop, felt death claim her with cold fingers and absolute certainty. And then there was nothing. Darkness, silence, the peace of death, which felt like floating, like releasing every burden she'd ever carried. Elena woke in her own bed, gasping for air like a drowning person breaking the surface, her hand flying to her throat where Klaus had cut her. But the skin was smooth, unmarked, the wound healed by the magic that had brought her back. She was alive. The spell had worked. Bonnie's magic, fueled by John's sacrifice, had pulled her back from death, but the cost was devastating. John Gilbert lay beside her bed, his body cooling, his hand still outstretched toward her, his face peaceful in death. On her pillow was a letter, his final words, written in his careful handwriting. Elena, I failed you in so many ways, but I hope that in this final act, I can show you what you've always deserved, a father's love. Live, Elena. Live fully and without regret. You are extraordinary, not because you're a doppelganger, but because you're you. I love you. I'm sorry I never said it while I could. Dad. Jenna was dead, truly dead. Her vampire existence ended before it really began, before she could learn control, before she could become anything other than a victim. Tyler had survived, resurrected by his werewolf healing, but traumatized by the experience of dying, of being killed as part of a ritual he never chose to be part of. And Stefan was gone, compelled to leave with Klaus to serve the hybrid who had murdered her aunt and nearly killed her. Elena sat up, clutching John's letter, and let herself cry for all of it. For Jenna and John and her parents, and every person who had died because she existed, because she was a doppelganger, because cosmic forces beyond her control had decided her blood was valuable. She cried until she had no tears left, until the sun rose over Mystic Falls and painted her room in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene in their beauty. Died their summer after the sacrifice was different from the summer after her parents' deaths. This time, Elena didn't try to pretend everything was fine, didn't perform normalcy for anyone's benefit. She grieved openly, honestly, for Jenna and John and the innocence she'd lost. She wrote in her journal about survivor's guilt, about the cost of being a doppelganger, about the people who kept dying to keep her alive, about wondering if any of it was worth it. And she made a promise to herself and to the people who had sacrificed everything for her. She would make it mean something. She would live fully, love fiercely, fight against the darkness that kept trying to claim her and everyone she cared about. She would not let their deaths be meaningless, because Elena Gilbert was more than a doppelganger, more than a sacrifice waiting to happen, more than cosmic machinery in human form. She was a survivor. She was someone who had died and come back. She was someone who would keep fighting, keep living, keep choosing love over fear. And she would get Stefan back. She would find a way to free him from Klaus, to bring him home. No matter what it took, no matter how long, she would save him the way he had saved her all those months ago at Wickery Bridge. The curse was broken. Klaus had his hybrid nature. But Elena Gilbert was still alive, still fighting. And her story was far from over. Stefan's absence created a hole in Elena's life that she felt with every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of every day. He was gone, compelled by Klaus to turn off his humanity to become the Ripper again, the monster he'd spent over a century trying to suppress. And Elena was left in Mystic Falls, waiting, grieving, desperate for any sign that the boy she loved still existed somewhere beneath the blood and violence. Damon filled the space Stefan left behind, though neither of them acknowledged it at first. He became Elena's protector, her confidant, the person who sat with her in the darkness and didn't try to tell her everything would be okay, because Damon understood darkness in ways Stefan never had, understood that sometimes the only way through grief was to sit in it, to let it consume you until you found the strength to crawl back out. "He's gone, Elena," Damon said one night, standing in her doorway with bourbon in hand and truth in his eyes. Stefan turned off his humanity. He's killing people, feeding indiscriminately, doing exactly what Klaus wants. The brother I knew is gone, and I don't know if he's coming back. "He will," Elena insisted, her voice fierce despite the tears threatening to fall. "I'll bring him back. I'll find a way to reach him." "And what if you can't?" Damon asked, and his voice was gentle, kinder than Elena had ever heard it. "What if the Ripper is all that's left? What happens to you then?" Elena had no answer. She could only cling to hope, to the belief that love was stronger than compulsion, that Stefan's humanity could be restored if she just tried hard enough, if she just refused to give up on him. But as weeks turned into months, as reports of the Ripper's kills spread across the country, Elena felt her certainty beginning to crack. Stefan was slipping away from her, becoming someone she didn't recognize, someone who killed without remorse and fed with abandon. And Damon was there, constant and solid, offering comfort she desperately needed. The shift happened gradually, imperceptibly at first. Damon's hand on her shoulder became familiar instead of unwelcome. His presence in her room at night became comforting rather than intrusive. His dark humor and honest assessments became the truth she needed instead of the empty reassurances everyone else offered. And then one night, standing on her porch after another failed attempt to reach Stefan, Damon looked at Elena with eyes that held a century of loneliness and longing, and he spoke the words that changed everything. "I love you, Elena," he said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely showed. "I know I shouldn't. I know you love Stefan, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this, can't keep hiding it. I love you. I think I've loved you since the moment I first saw you. Even when I was trying to use you, trying to open the tomb for Catherine. Somewhere along the way, You became the most important thing in my world." Elena stared at him, her heart pounding, her mind racing through every interaction they'd had, every moment of connection, every time Damon had been there when Stefan couldn't be. And she realized with shocking clarity that somewhere in the midst of grief and loss, she had developed feelings for Damon that went far beyond friendship, far beyond the obligation of dating his brother. "I don't know what to say," Elena whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Damon replied. "I just needed you to know. I needed to be honest, just once, about what I feel." The kiss happened weeks later, after too much champagne and too many late nights, and too much grief suppressed for too long. Elena stood on the same porch where Damon had confessed his feelings, and she looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not Stefan's brother, but Damon himself. Complicated, damaged, trying desperately to be better than he believed he was capable of being. "Kiss me," Elena said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. Damon's eyes widened, shock and hope and desire warring across his features. "Elena." "Please," she said. "I need to feel something other than grief. I need to know if this is real." Damon crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands framing her face with surprising gentleness. And then he kissed her, and Elena felt the world tilt, felt something ignite in her chest that had nothing to do with Stefan, and everything to do with the complicated, infuriating, impossibly devoted vampire standing in front of her. The guilt came immediately, crushing and absolute. Stefan was out there, somewhere, fighting Klaus's compulsion, trying to hold on to his humanity, and Elena was kissing his brother, betraying him in the worst possible way. She pulled back, her hand covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "I can't," she gasped. "Damon, I can't. Stefan isn't here," Damon said, and there was no triumph in his voice, only sadness. "Stefan chose to leave you, chose to save Caroline instead of staying with you. I'm not saying it was wrong. I'm just saying you can't put your life on hold forever, waiting for him to come back." But Elena did wait. She waited through Stefan's eventual return, through his struggles to reclaim his humanity, through the painful process of rebuilding what Klaus had destroyed. And when Stefan finally came back to himself, when his humanity switched back on and he remembered everything he'd done, everyone he'd killed, Elena was there. "I love you," she told Stefan, and she meant it. "I never stopped loving you." But Stefan saw the truth in her eyes, heard what she didn't say. "But you love Damon too, don't you?" Elena wanted to deny it, wanted to insist that Damon was just a friend, just someone who had helped her through a difficult time. But she'd learned that lies in Mystic Falls only ever made things worse, that honesty was the only path forward even when it hurt. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "I'm confused. You were gone for so long, and Damon was there. And somewhere along the way my feelings got complicated. But I chose you, Stefan. I'm choosing you now." Stefan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You can't choose feelings, Elena. They just are. And I can see it when you look at my brother. I can see what you feel for him, even if you don't want to admit it yet." The relationship limped forward, both of them trying to reclaim what they'd had before Klaus, before the sacrifice, before everything changed. But the ghost of Damon stood between them, unspoken, but always present. Elena felt it every time. She caught herself thinking about Damon's laugh, his honesty, The way he saw her not as something fragile to protect, but as someone strong enough to handle truth. And then Elena died again. Rebecca, angry and vengeful, ran her car off Wickery Bridge in a cruel echo of the accident that had killed her parents. Eleanor drowned with Damon's blood in her system, blood he'd given her earlier to heal an injury, and she woke up in transition, caught between human and vampire, with 24 hours to decide whether to complete the transformation or die. The world as a vampire was overwhelming. Every sound amplified to painful intensity, every scent sharp and distinct, every emotion magnified beyond control, and the thirst, the burning, relentless thirst for blood that consumed every thought, every moment. Elena fed on Damon to complete her transition, chose his blood over Stefan's in a moment of instinct that revealed more than any conscious decision could. And in the aftermath, lying in Damon's arms while her new vampire senses adjusted to the world, Eleanor understood that her feelings had shifted irrevocably. The sire bond, Stefan said weeks later, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. You're sire to Damon. That's why you chose his blood. Why you can't seem to stay away from him. Your feelings aren't real, Elena. They're a product of vampire magic. The sire bond explained everything and nothing. It was true that Elena felt compelled to please Damon, to follow his suggestions, to want what he wanted. But the feelings themselves, the love, the connection, the sense of being understood, those had existed before she became a vampire, before any sire bond could have formed. We need to break it, Elena said, because she needed to know the truth, needed to understand if her feelings were genuine or manufactured by supernatural forces beyond her control. Breaking the sire bond required killing Klaus, the original hybrid whose bloodline created Damon's vampire line. It was impossible, suicidal, a plan doomed to failure. But Eleanor was desperate for answers, desperate to know if loving Damon was choice or compulsion. They found another way, a witch's spell, ancient and dangerous, that severed the sire bond without requiring Klaus's death. And when it was done, when the magical connection shattered like glass, Elena waited to feel her feelings change, waited for the love she felt for Damon to disappear with the broken bond. But nothing changed. She still loved him, still wanted him, still felt more herself with Damon than she ever had with Stefan. It wasn't the sire bond, Elena told Stefan, her voice breaking with the weight of what she was about to do. My feelings for Damon are real. They were real before I turned, and they're real now. I love you, Stefan. I'll always love you. You were my first love, the person who saved me and showed me a world I never knew existed. But I'm in love with Damon. Stefan's expression crumbled, pain and acceptance warring across his features. I know, he said quietly. I've known for a while. I just didn't want to admit it. I'm sorry, Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. I never wanted to hurt you. I know that too, Stefan said, and that's what makes this bearable. You didn't choose Damon to hurt me. You chose him because he makes you happy in ways I couldn't. And maybe I need to learn to be okay with that. The acceptance didn't come immediately. Stefan struggled with watching Elena and Damon together, with seeing his brother claim the love Stefan had thought was his. But gradually, with time and distance, and his own journey of self-discovery, Stefan found a way to be happy for them, to support Elena's choice, even though it cost him everything. And Elena and Damon built something real, something honest, something that had survived death and doubt and supernatural interference. They fought and loved and hurt each other and came back together, learning what it meant to be partners rather than just lovers. "I choose you," Elena told Damon one night, standing in the same place where he'd first confessed his love. "Not because of a sire bond, not because Stefan is gone, but because you're who I want. You're who I love. Maybe I always have, underneath everything else. Maybe that's what terrified me about you from the beginning." Damon smiled, pulling her close, his arms wrapping around her with a certainty that came from knowing she was finally, truly his. "I'll spend forever making sure you never regret that choice." And for the first time since her parents died, since her world fell apart and rebuilt itself in impossible configurations, Elena felt at peace. She had chosen love over safety, honesty over comfort, the complicated truth over the simple lie. She had chosen Damon, and he had chosen her, and whatever came next, they would face it together. Wickery Bridge held a special kind of terror for Elena Gilbert. It was the place where her parents had died, where her human life had ended even though she'd survived. And on a night thick with fog and the weight of old memories, it became the place where her humanity ended for real. The evening had started simply enough. Elena and Matt Donovan, her ex-boyfriend and longtime friend, were driving back from a town council meeting. Matt was at the wheel of his truck, Elena beside him, both of them comfortable in the easy silence of people who'd known each other since childhood. They were talking about normal things, graduation plans, college applications, the future that stretched ahead of them like an open road. Neither of them saw Rebecca Mickelson standing in the middle of the bridge until it was too late. Rebecca, the original vampire with 1,000 years of anger and a fresh grudge against Elena, stood perfectly still as Matt's truck barreled toward her. At the last second, she moved with supernatural speed, but not to get out of the way. Instead, she struck the truck's side, panel with enough force to send it spinning, tires screeching, metal screaming, the world tilting into chaos. The truck crashed through the same wooden railing Elena's parents' car had crashed through years ago. For one terrible moment, Elena felt déjà vu so powerful it stole her breath. The weightlessness, the horrible suspension between road and water, the certainty of what came next. Then they hit the water, and the past became present, history repeating itself with cruel precision. The truck sank nose first, water flooding through windows that had shattered on impact. Elena's head struck something hard, and her vision swam with stars and darkness. Beside her, Matt struggled with his seatbelt, panic clear in his eyes, his breath coming in short gasps as the water level rose around them. "Elena," Matt's voice cut through the ringing in her ears. "We have to get out. We have to swim." But Elena couldn't move. Her seatbelt was jammed, the mechanism crushed by the impact, holding. Her pinned as water climbed toward her chin, her nose covering her completely. She held her breath, watching bubbles escape toward the surface that seemed impossibly far away. And she thought with strange clarity, "This is how I die, the same way they did, in the same water, off the same bridge, as if fate had always intended for the Gilberts to drown here." Then Stefan was there, diving through the driver's side window with the same impossible speed he'd shown the first time. His hands reaching for Elena first because that's what he always did, what he'd been doing since the night he saved her instead of her parents. But this time, Lena spoke. her voice bubbling out in the water with the last of her air. Save Matt first. Stefan's eyes widened, shock and recognition and terrible understanding passing across his features. She was giving him the same choice her father had given him all those years ago. She was asking him to save someone else, to let her drown if it came to that. Please, Elena said, or tried to say, the word lost in bubbles and darkness. Matt first. Stefan hesitated for one agonized second. Then he grabbed Matt, tearing through the seatbelt and pulling him from the sinking truck. Elena watched them go, watched Stefan swim toward the surface with Matt in tow, and she felt strangely peaceful. If she died here, at least it would be her choice. At least this time, the person who drowned would be the one who decided to. The water filled her lungs. Her body fought against it, convulsing, desperate for air that wouldn't come. The world dimmed at the edges, narrowing to a pinpoint of fading consciousness. Elena thought of her parents, wondered if she would see them now, if death meant reunion or just silence. Then Stefan was back, his hands on her shoulders, tearing through her seatbelt with desperate strength. He pulled her from the truck and kicked toward the surface, his movements urgent now, frantic, trying to undo the choice she'd forced him to make. But it was too late. Elena knew it even before they broke the surface, even before Stefan laid her on the muddy bank and started chest compressions with hands that shook. She'd been underwater too long. Her heart had stopped. She was dead, clinically, and completely dead. Except for one small detail that changed everything. Earlier that day, Damon had given Elena his blood. She'd been injured helping Jeremy with something. The specifics blurred in her memory, and Damon had insisted she drink just a little vampire blood to heal faster, to be safe. It was a precaution they'd all grown accustomed to, this insurance policy against the constant dangers of living in Mystic Falls. Elena woke up on the bank coughing water, gasping for air, her body alive again, but fundamentally changed. She could feel it immediately, the difference thrumming through her veins, the world suddenly too bright, too loud, too much. Vampire blood in her system. Death by drowning. The equation was simple and devastating. She was in transition. No, Elena whispered, the word tearing from her throat. No, no, no. This can't be happening. Stefan's face was stricken, guilt and horror warring in his expression. Elena, I'm so sorry. I tried to get back to you faster, tried to save you in time. You did what I asked, Elena said, her voice hollow. You saved Matt first, just like my dad asked you to save me first. We're even now. But they weren't even. Nothing about this was even. Because now Elena had 24 hours to make an impossible choice. Complete the transition by drinking human blood and become a vampire, or refuse and die for real, permanently, with no resurrections or magical loopholes. They took her to the Salvatore boarding house, where she could be contained if necessary, where the people who loved her could watch over her, as she grappled with the biggest decision of her life. Elena sat in Stefan's room, the same room where he'd first told her he was a vampire, where her education in the supernatural had begun, and she felt the transition working through her body like a disease. Every sound was amplified to painful intensity. She could hear conversations happening 3 floors away, could hear the blood pumping through Stefan's and Damon's veins with a rhythm that made her mouth water in ways that disgusted her. Every scent was sharp and distinct. The old wood of the house, the lingering smell of bourbon, the irresistible perfume of human blood that called to her with primal insistence. And the emotions. Every feeling she'd ever had was magnified beyond control, turned up to volumes that threatened to shatter her. The grief over her parents' deaths, suppressed for so long, came roaring back with crushing force. The guilt over Jenna, over John, over every person who had died because she was a doppelganger, threatened to drown her more thoroughly than the water had. "I can't do this," Elena said, her hands shaking, her whole body trembling with the effort of containing feelings too big for her skin. "I can't be a vampire. I can't give up my humanity, my chance at a normal life, children, growing old. I can't." Caroline sat beside her, taking Eleanor's hands with surprising gentleness. Caroline, who had been turned against her will, who had fought through the transition and emerged stronger, more controlled, more herself than she'd ever been as a human. "I know it's scary," Caroline said softly. "I know it feels impossible, but Elena, you're the strongest person I know. If anyone can handle this, if anyone can be a vampire and still hold on to their humanity, it's you." "What if I lose myself?" Elena whispered. "What if I become a monster? What if the emotions are too much and I turn them off? Become like Stefan was when Klaus compelled him. I've seen what vampires can become. I've seen the darkness." "And you've also seen vampires choose to be good," Caroline countered. "You've seen Stefan fight his nature every day. You've seen Damon try to be better than he thinks he's capable of being. You've seen me learn control, learn to help people instead of hurting them. Being a vampire doesn't make you a monster, Elena. It just makes you a vampire. What you do with that, who you choose to be, that's still up to you." Damon stood by the window, his back to the room, his shoulders tense with barely controlled emotion. "You have another option," he said quietly. "You can choose not to feed. You can let the transition run its course and die peacefully. No one would blame you for that choice, Elena. No one would think less of you for deciding this life isn't what you want." "I would blame myself," Elena said, her voice breaking. "All those people who died to keep me alive, my parents, Jenna, John, they sacrificed everything so I could live. How can I throw that away? How can I choose death when they chose life for me?" "Because it's your choice," Stefan said, kneeling in front of her, his eyes full of understanding and sorrow. "Not theirs, not ours, yours. You have to decide what you can live with, Elena, what kind of existence you can bear." The hours ticked by with terrible inexorability. Eleanor's time was running out, the transition demanding completion or death. She felt herself weakening, her human body struggling to sustain itself without the blood that would seal her transformation. The thirst grew stronger with each passing hour, a burning ache in her throat that made it hard to think, hard to focus on anything except the desperate need to feed. Finally, with only an hour left before the choice was made for her by default, Elena spoke the words that would seal her fate. "I want to live," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm terrified and I don't know if I can do this, but I want to live. I want to see tomorrow and the day after that and all the days that come after. I want to fight and love and exist, even if it's as a vampire, even if it means giving up the future I thought I'd have." Damon turned from the window, his expression carefully neutral, but Elena could see the relief in his eyes. "Then you need to feed. Human blood, Elena. Animal blood won't complete the transition for a newborn vampire. It has to be human." "I'll do it," Jeremy said from the doorway, and Eleanor's heart broke at the sight of her little brother, so much older than his years, offering his blood to turn his sister into the very thing he'd been raised to hate. "I'll let you feed from me, Elena. I trust you not to kill me." But the thought of biting Jeremy, of sinking her teeth into her brother's flesh, was too horrible to contemplate. "I can't," Elena said. "I can't hurt you." "You won't hurt me," Jeremy insisted. "You'll save yourself. That's what matters." In the end, it was Damon who offered the solution that made it bearable. He filled a glass with his own blood, fresh and potent, and he handed it to Elena with steady hands. "Drink from me," Damon said simply. "Complete the transition. Become what you need to become to survive." Elena took the glass with trembling hands, looking at the dark liquid that would irrevocably change her life. She thought of everything she was giving up. The warmth of the sun on her skin without fear, the taste of real food, the possibility of children, the chance to grow old and die peacefully. She thought of everything she was gaining: strength to protect the people she loved, time to make a difference, centuries to exist and fight and matter. Then she drank. The blood hit her system like fire, like electricity, like coming alive for the first time. Every cell in her body responded, transforming, completing the change that death had started. Elena felt her humanity slipping away, not gone but altered, shifted into something other, something that would never be quite human again. When the glass was empty, Elena set it down with hands that no longer shook. She looked up at Damon, at Stefan, at Caroline and Jeremy and everyone who had gathered to witness her transformation, and she understood that she had just crossed a threshold from which there was no return. "I'm a vampire," Elena said, testing the words, feeling their weight and truth. "I'm actually a vampire." The reality of it hit her in waves. She would never age beyond 18, would never have children, never carry a baby, never experience the family she'd always imagined building, would never taste her favorite foods without them turning to ash in her mouth, would never feel truly warm again. Her body temperature dropped to match the still heart in her chest. But she was alive, or whatever counted as alive for a vampire. She had time, centuries of it potentially, to figure out who she was now, what this new existence meant. "We'll teach you control," Caroline promised. "We'll help you through this. You're not alone, Elena. You'll never be alone." And as Elena sat in the Salvatore boarding house, newly transformed, newly vampire, she felt the weight of her choice settling over her like a cloak. She had become the thing she'd feared since the night Stefan first told her vampires existed. She had joined the supernatural world completely, irrevocably, with no way back to the human life she'd lost. But she was still Elena Gilbert, still the girl who chose to save others, who fought for the people she loved, who refused to give up even when giving up would be easier. Being a vampire didn't change that. It just changed how she would fight, how she would love, how she would exist in a world that had always been more complicated than she'd known. The sun rose over Mystic Falls, and Elena watched it through the window, protected by the daylight ring Stefan had commissioned for her. She was a vampire now, and somehow, impossibly, she would learn to live with that truth. Learning to be a vampire was like learning to exist in a body that didn't quite fit, in a skin that felt too tight and too loose simultaneously. Elena spent weeks mastering the basics, how to control her strength so she didn't shatter everything she touched, how to manage the bloodlust that burned constantly in her throat, how to move through the world without revealing what she'd become. Caroline became her guide, patient and thorough, teaching Elena the skills she'd learned through her own brutal transition. They practiced feeding on blood bags stolen from the hospital, practiced compelling humans to forget they'd seen anything unusual, practiced the careful performance of humanity that would allow Elena to attend school, to interact with people who didn't know about vampires, to maintain some semblance of her old life. But the emotions were the hardest part. Everything Elena felt was amplified to unbearable intensity, every grief and joy and fear magnified beyond human capacity to contain. She could feel the weight of every loss. Her parents, Jenna, John, Alaric, who had died protecting her, pressing down on her chest like physical weight. The guilt of survival, already heavy when she was human, became crushing in its vampire intensity. "You have to learn to manage it," Caroline said, watching Elena struggle through another panic attack triggered by overwhelming emotion. "You can't let the feelings control you. That way lies madness, or worse, flipping the switch." The humanity switch. Caroline had explained it during one of their training sessions, her voice carefully neutral. Every vampire possessed the ability to turn off their emotions completely, to shut down their humanity and exist in a state of perfect emptiness. No guilt, no grief, no pain, just hunger and instinct and a terrible freedom from caring. "Don't ever do it," Caroline warned. "Once you flip that switch, coming back is nearly impossible. And the things you do without your humanity, the people you hurt, you have to live with all of that when you turn it back on. It's not worth it, Elena. No matter how much it hurts to feel, it's better than feeling nothing at all." Elena promised she wouldn't. Promised she would endure the pain, would learn to manage the amplified emotions, would hold onto her humanity no matter how heavy it became. She meant the promise when she made it, believed she was strong enough to keep it. Then Jeremy died, and everything Elena thought she knew about her own strength shattered like glass. It happened on a spring night, when the air smelled like rain and new growth, when the world felt full of possibility and promise. Jeremy was helping Bonnie with a spell, something about the veil between the living and the dead, something Elena didn't fully understand because she'd been distracted, focused on her own struggles with vampire existence. The spell went wrong, or maybe it went exactly as planned, but the plan was crueler than anyone had anticipated. Jeremy Gilbert, 18 years old, a hunter marked by ancient magic, died with Bonnie kneeling beside him, her hands glowing with failed magic, her face stricken with horror and grief. Elena found them in the Gilbert house, in the room where Jeremy had grown up, where he'd played video games and done homework and been her little brother. She found him lying on the floor, his eyes open and unseeing, his chest still, his body already cooling with the finality of death. For a long moment, Elena just stood there, unable to process what she was seeing. Jeremy couldn't be dead. He was supposed to be the one who survived, who made it through all of this chaos and went on to live a normal life. He was supposed to outlive her, supposed to grow old and have children and tell stories about his crazy sister who became a vampire. But his heart wasn't beating. Elena could hear every sound in the house, the creak of floorboards, the drip of a faucet, Bonnie's ragged breathing. but she couldn't hear the steady rhythm of Jeremy's heartbeat because it was gone, silenced, stopped forever. "No," Elena whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. "No, Jeremy, wake up. Please wake up. You have to wake up." Bonnie's voice was raw with grief and guilt. "I tried to bring him back. I tried the spell, tried everything I know, but nothing worked. He's gone, Elena. He's really gone." Elena felt something inside her crack, some essential part of her fracturing under the weight of this loss. Jeremy was her last remaining family, her baby brother, the person she'd been protecting since their parent died. And now he was gone, taken by the same supernatural world that had claimed everyone else she loved. The grief should have consumed her, should have broken her completely, sent her spiraling into despair so profound there was no climbing out. But instead, Elena felt herself reaching for the switch Caroline had warned her about, felt her hand hovering over that internal lever that would turn off all of this unbearable pain. "Don't," Caroline said, appearing in the doorway, her voice urgent with understanding. "Elena, don't do it. Don't flip your switch. We'll get through this together." But Elena was already falling into the darkness, already shutting down the parts of herself that felt and cared and loved. She couldn't carry this weight, couldn't survive this loss on top of all the others. So she did the one thing she promised she would never do. She flipped the switch. The relief was immediate and intoxicating. All the grief, all the guilt, all the crushing weight of emotion simply vanished. Elena stood up from Jeremy's body and felt nothing. No pain, no sorrow, no love. Just emptiness and a terrible, wonderful freedom. "Elena," Caroline said carefully, and Elena heard the fear in her voice, the recognition of what had just happened. "I'm fine," Elena said, and her voice was light, almost cheerful. "Actually, I'm better than fine. I feel amazing, like I've been carrying chains my whole life and someone just cut them off." She looked down at Jeremy's body and felt nothing. No grief for her dead brother, no guilt for failing to protect him, no love for the boy who had been her family, just mild curiosity about what to do with the corpse. Practical considerations untainted by emotion. "We should burn down the house," Elena said casually. "Get rid of the body, collect the insurance money, start fresh somewhere new." Caroline's face went pale. "Elena, that's your brother. That's Jeremy. You love him." "I don't love anyone," Elena said, and it was true, perfectly and completely true. "I don't feel anything except hungry. And you know what? It's fantastic. I should have done this months ago." The weeks that followed were a nightmare for everyone except Elena, who moved through the world in a state of perfect sociopathic calm. She fed on humans without compunction, compelling them to forget, but caring nothing for their fear or pain. She said cruel things to Caroline, targeting her insecurities with surgical precision. Watching her best friend cry without feeling even a flicker of remorse. She partnered with Rebecca, the original vampire who had killed her, finding kindred spirit in someone equally empty, equally unconcerned with human morality. Together, they tore through Mystic Falls like twin tornadoes, leaving chaos and trauma in their wake. Elena tried to kill Bonnie, blaming her for Jeremy's death, hunting her former best friend with predatory focus. She burned down the Gilbert house with Jeremy's body inside, watching the flames consume her childhood home without a trace of grief. She tortured Caroline psychologically, using her knowledge of Caroline's deepest fears and insecurities as weapons designed to cause maximum damage, through it all, she felt nothing. No guilt, no shame, no love. Just the cold satisfaction of power exercised without constraint, of existing without the burden of conscience. Damon and Stefan watched helplessly, trying to reach the girl they loved beneath the monster she'd become. They tried reasoning with her, tried appealing to her dormant humanity, tried everything short of physical force to make her feel again. "Come back to us," Damon pleaded, his voice raw with desperation. "Elena, please. I know you're in there somewhere. I know you can hear me." "Oh, I can hear you," Elena said, examining her nails with bored disinterest. "I just don't care. That's the beautiful part, Damon. I finally understand what you felt all those years when you didn't care about anyone or anything. It's liberating." They tried the intervention approach, kidnapping her and holding her in the Salvatore cellar, subjecting her to attempts at emotional manipulation designed to crack her empty facade. They showed her photos of Jeremy, of her parents, of all the people she'd loved. They played recordings of her own voice from before, reading journal entries full of feeling and hope. Elena endured it all with perfect indifference, occasionally offering cruel commentary designed to hurt them as much as possible. "You want me to care about Jeremy," she said, her voice mocking. "He was weak. He died because he couldn't handle the supernatural world. That's natural selection, not tragedy." Stefan tried the compassionate approach, sitting with her for hours, talking about the importance of humanity, about how feeling pain was worth it because it meant you could also feel joy. "I felt joy as a human," Elena countered. "And look where it got me. Dead parents, dead brother, dead aunt, dead guardian. Everyone I loved ended up dead. So forgive me if I prefer not to feel that particular emotion anymore." But cracks began to appear in Elena's armor. Small moments when something would pierce the emptiness. A song that reminded her of her mother. A place she'd visited with Jeremy. The scent of Damon's cologne triggering Sen's memory of loving him. She pushed these moments down ruthlessly, refusing to let them take root. But they kept coming, kept chipping away at the wall she'd built around her heart. Finally, Matt Donovan broke through. Matt, who had known her longest, who remembered the girl she'd been before any of this supernatural chaos, who loved her with the simple, uncomplicated affection of childhood friendship. "I know you think you're protecting yourself," Matt said, sitting across from her in the cellar where she was being held. "I know turning it off feels safer. But Elena, the girl I grew up with, the girl who used to make me laugh and who cried at sad movies and who loved so fiercely it terrified her, she's still in there. And she needs to come back. Not for us, for you." Something in his voice, some combination of honesty and love and refusal to give up, reached the part of Elena that still existed beneath the emptiness. She felt the switch beginning to move, felt humanity creeping back in like water through cracks in a dam. "No," Elena said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I can't. If I turn it back on, I'll have to feel Jeremy's death again. I'll have to carry that weight." "Yes," Matt said simply, "you will. And it will hurt worse than anything you've ever felt. But you'll survive it, Elena. Because that's what you do. You survive." The switch flipped back with the force of a tidal wave. Every emotion Elena had suppressed came flooding back simultaneously. Grief for Jeremy, guilt for the things she'd done without humanity, love for the people she'd hurt, pain so profound it felt like dying. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing with the force of it, feeling everything all at once with vampire intensity that threatened to shatter her completely. Damon was there immediately, gathering her into his arms, holding her while she broke apart. "I've got you," he murmured. "I've got you, Elena. You're okay. You're going to be okay." But Elena wasn't okay. She'd turned off her humanity and done terrible things, hurt people she loved, become the monster she'd always feared. And now she had to live with that, had to carry the weight of her actions along with the grief that had driven her to emptiness. The road back was long and painful. Elena had to apologize to Caroline, to Bonnie, to everyone she'd hurt, had to rebuild trust that she'd shattered, had to learn to live with Jeremy's death without turning off her emotions again, to feel the pain without letting it consume her. And she had to discover that Jeremy was alive after all, that Bonnie had been hiding him with magic, protecting him while lying to everyone about his death. The relief and fury Elena felt at this revelation were equally intense. Gratitude for his survival mixed with rage at being put through that grief unnecessarily. "I'm sorry," Bonnie said, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know what else to do. There were threats, things hunting him. I thought hiding him was the only way to keep him safe." Elena forgave her eventually, because that's what you did when you loved someone. You forgave them for the mistakes made in the name of protection, for the lies told to keep you safe. But the experience had changed Elena, hardened something inside her, shown her the darkness she was capable of embracing. She had flipped the switch and survived turning it back on. She had become a monster and found her way back to humanity. And that knowledge would stay with her, a reminder of how thin the line was between the person she wanted to be and the thing she feared becoming. The cure for vampirism existed. This impossible truth arrived in Mystic Falls like an earthquake, shaking the foundations of everything Elena thought she understood about her eternal existence. After months of being a vampire, of learning to manage the bloodlust and amplified emotions, of accepting that she would never age beyond 18, never have children, never experience the human life she'd lost, suddenly there was a possibility of getting it all back. The discovery came through ancient texts and Silas, an immortal witch who had been buried alive for 2,000 years. Silas had created the immortality spell that gave rise to all vampires, and he had also created its antidote, a cure that could reverse vampirism, restore mortality, give back everything the transformation had taken. "One dose," Bonnie explained, her voice tight with the implications. "There's only one dose of the cure in existence, which means only one vampire can take it, can become human again." Elena sat in the Salvatore parlor, surrounded by the people whose immortal lives might be changed by this revelation. Stefan, who had been a vampire for over 160 years, who had spent more than a century fighting his ripper nature. Damon, who had embraced vampirism for over a century and a half, who claimed to have no interest in humanity. Caroline, who had found strength and purpose in her vampire existence. Rebecca, an original who had been immortal for 1,000 years and desperately wanted to be human again. And Elena, the newest vampire among them, who had lost the most recently, who still remembered what food tasted like, what warmth felt like, what it meant to have a future that included growing old. "I want it," Elena said immediately, the words escaping before she could think them through. "I want to be human again." Damon's expression shuddered, pain flashing across his features before he could hide it. Elena understood immediately what her declaration meant to him. If she took the cure, if she became human again, she would age while he remained frozen at 24 forever. She would grow old, would die within a handful of decades, would leave him alone for the eternity that stretched ahead. "Are you sure?" Damon asked, his voice carefully neutral. "You understand what you're giving up, the strength, the speed, the centuries we could have together." "I understand what I'm getting back," Elena countered. "The chance to have children, to grow old, to taste food, to be warm, to have a normal life, Damon. The life I always wanted before any of this happened." Stefan's thoughts were written clearly on his face. He wanted her to take the cure, wanted her to reclaim her humanity, wanted her to have the future she deserved. Because Stefan had never forgiven himself for what Elena had become, had carried guilt over her transformation like a weight around his neck. "You should take it," Stefan said quietly. "You never wanted to be a vampire, Elena. This is your chance to undo what happened, to get your life back." But Catherine Pierce had other plans. Catherine, Elena's doppelganger predecessor, the vampire who had run from Klaus's sacrifice 500 years ago and spent centuries evading death, wanted the cure more desperately than anyone. Being human again meant she could finally stop running, could finally escape the enemies who hunted her, could live and age and die peacefully instead of looking over her shoulder for eternity. The confrontation happened in an abandoned building on the outskirts of Mystic Falls, all parties converging on the location where the cure was supposedly hidden. Elena arrived with Damon and Stefan, prepared to fight for the cure if necessary, to claim her humanity by force if Catherine tried to take it first. But Catherine was faster, more ruthless, more willing to do whatever it took to survive. She ambushed Elena in a corridor, overpowered her with centuries of experience, and forced the cure down Elena's throat before anyone could intervene. The transformation was immediate and disorienting. Elena felt her vampire nature ripping away, felt her enhanced senses dulling, felt her strength ebbing like water through her fingers. Her heartbeat, silent for months, suddenly thundered in her chest. Her body temperature spiked as warmth returned to flesh that had been cold as marble. The constant thirst for blood simply vanished, replaced by normal human hunger and thirst. Elena collapsed onto the floor, gasping, her body struggling to adjust to being mortal again. Everything felt different, wrong, like she'd been stripped of senses she'd come to rely on. The world was quieter, dimmer, slower. She was weaker, more fragile, more vulnerable than she'd been since the night she drowned. "Elena?" Damon's voice, and she could barely hear him over the sound of her own heartbeat. "Elena, are you okay?" "I'm human," Elena whispered, her voice strange in her own ears. "I'm human again." The joy should have been overwhelming. She'd wanted this, had declared her desire for the cure mere hours ago. But the reality of it was more complicated than she'd anticipated. Being human again meant vulnerability in a world full of supernatural threats. It meant mortality, the certainty of aging and dying while everyone she loved remained young forever. It meant losing the strength she'd gained, the power to protect herself and others. And it meant something else, something she hadn't fully considered. As a vampire, she and Damon had been equals, immortal beings who could spend eternity together. As a human, She was suddenly breakable, temporary, a relationship with an expiration date stamped into her very cells. Catherine, meanwhile, was dying. The cure had reversed her vampirism completely, which meant her body was suddenly experiencing all 500 years she'd been alive. She aged rapidly, her face wrinkling, her hair going white, her body becoming frail and ancient. The immortality that had preserved her was gone, and time was collecting its debt all at once. Elena watched her doppelganger deteriorate with complicated emotions. Catherine had taken her choice, had forced humanity on her without consent. But Catherine was also dying, paying the ultimate price for her desperate grab at mortality. "I just wanted to stop running," Catherine said, her voice thin and papery with age. "I just wanted peace." She got her peace, dying within hours of taking the cure, her body finally surrendering to the centuries it had defied. And Elena was left to navigate being human again, to figure out what this new reality meant for her life and her relationships. College became possible again. Elena enrolled at Whitmore with Caroline, who remained a vampire but wanted the experience of higher education. They lived in a dorm, attended classes, pretended to be normal students. Elena reveled in the small joys of humanity, tasting pizza, feeling the sun warm her skin without fear, sleeping deeply instead of the shallow rest vampires required. But the vulnerability was terrifying. Elena was suddenly the weakest person in any supernatural confrontation, unable to defend herself against vampires or werewolves or witches. She carried Vervain constantly, relied on her supernatural friends for protection, learned to navigate a dangerous world without the advantages vampirism had provided. Her relationship with Damon became more complicated. He was patient, devoted, insisting that her mortality didn't change his feelings. But Elena could see the fear in his eyes, the awareness that she was fragile now, breakable, destined to leave him within a handful of decades. "I don't care that you're human," Damon said one night, holding her close. "I'd rather have 50 years with you than an eternity with anyone else." But Elena cared. She cared that she was aging while he stayed young, cared that she would die and leave him alone, cared that their relationship now had a clock ticking down, counting the precious limited time they had together. Then Damon died, or seemed to die. The other side, the purgatory where dead supernatural beings went, was collapsing, disintegrating, threatening to take everyone trapped there into oblivion. Bonnie tried to bring people back, to save as many as possible before the other side disappeared forever. But there wasn't enough time, wasn't enough power, and Damon and Bonnie were both trapped when the veil between worlds finally shattered. Elena's grief was all too familiar. This crushing weight of loss she'd carried so many times before, but this time it was worse, because this time she was human, experiencing the pain without vampire intensity, but also without vampire emotional control. She mourned Damon with every fibre of her being, convinced she'd lost him forever, that he was gone beyond any hope of recovery. She threw herself into medical school, channeling her grief into purpose, into becoming the doctor her father had been. She studied anatomy and pathology, learned to save lives, to heal instead of hurt. It gave her something to focus on besides the gaping hole Damon's absence left in her life. 4 months after Damon's supposed death, Bonnie brought him back. She'd found a way, had sacrificed and struggled, and finally succeeded in pulling him out of a prison world, where he'd been trapped with a sociopathic witch named Kai Parker. Elena's reunion with Damon was overwhelming. Joy and relief and love flooding through her with an intensity that made her grateful for human limitations and emotion. "You came back," Elena said, holding him like she'd never let go. "I thought I'd lost you forever." "You can't get rid of me that easily," Damon replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I promised you forever, Elena, and I keep my promises. But forever was complicated when one person was immortal and the other was decidedly not." Elena understood that their time was limited, that she would age and die while Damon remained young. The awareness colored everything, made every moment precious and painful in equal measure. "What if you took the cure?" Elena suggested one night, the idea occurring to her with sudden clarity. "There might be a way to make another dose, to reverse your vampirism. We could grow old together, could have a normal life." Damon considered this, wrestling with over a century and a half of vampirism, with the question of whether he could give up immortality, strength, all the advantages that came with his nature. "Would that make you happy?" he asked finally. "If I became human again?" "I want you to be happy," Elena said, "whatever that means for you. But yes, the thought of growing old together, of having a future that isn't measured in my limited decades against your eternity, that would make me happy." The possibility hung between them, a future that might include shared mortality, shared humanity, a normal life in an abnormal world. But before they could pursue it, before they could explore the question of whether Damon would choose to become human, Kai Parker enacted his revenge. Kai, the sociopathic witch who'd been trapped in the prison world with Damon, who Bonnie had refused to release, who harbored a grudge against both of them, cast a spell with devastating consequences. He linked Elena's life to Bonnie's, creating a magical connection that meant Elena would sleep as long as Bonnie lived, would only wake when Bonnie died. The spell hit Elena without warning, a wave of magical exhaustion that dragged her down into unconscious darkness. She had time for one thought: this can't be happening, before sleep claimed her completely. When she didn't wake up, when hours turned into days with Elena trapped in enchanted sleep, the truth became horrifyingly clear. Bonnie was alive, healthy, likely to live for 60 or 70 more years, which meant Elena would sleep for decades, would miss her entire young adult life, would wake up elderly if she woke at all. Damon faced an impossible choice. He could kill Bonnie and wake Elena immediately, or he could let Elena sleep, could honor Bonnie's life, could wait decades for the woman he loved to open her eyes again. The temptation to choose Elena, to end Bonnie's life and reclaim the love of his own, was overwhelming. But it was also exactly what Kai wanted, the chaos and pain and impossible moral dilemma that the sociopathic witch found so entertaining. In the end, Damon chose to wait, chose Bonnie's life over his own happiness, chose to let Elena sleep, to protect her in her vulnerable state, to count the years until she woke naturally. Elena's last conscious moments were spent saying goodbye to the people she loved, recording messages for them to hear while she slept. She said goodbye to Caroline, to Bonnie, to Stefan, to Jeremy, and she said goodbye to Damon, knowing it might be 60 years before she saw him again, before she woke to find him unchanged, while the world around them had transformed completely. "Wait for me," Elena whispered, her eyes already closing, sleep dragging her down into darkness. "Promise me you'll wait." "Always," Damon promised, his voice breaking. "I'll wait forever if I have to." Then Elena was gone, sleeping peacefully, her breathing slow and steady, her body preserved perfectly by Kai's spell. She dreamed of the life she'd lived, the people she'd loved, the choices she'd made. And she waited, sleeping beauty in a glass coffin, for the day Bonnie Bennett would die and set her free. The prison world where Damon and Bonnie had been trapped was a snapshot of time, frozen on May 10th, 1994, endlessly repeating the same day. It was Kai Parker's personal hell, created by the Gemini Coven to punish him for murdering most of his siblings in a brutal massacre. Kai had been alone there for nearly 20 years before Damon and Bonnie arrived. 20 years of isolation that had twisted an already damaged mind into something monstrous. When Bonnie finally brought Damon back to the real world, she inadvertently gave Kai the key he needed to escape as well. The sociopathic witch followed them through the veil between worlds, emerging into a reality he'd been exiled from for 2 decades. Hungry for revenge against the family that had imprisoned him and against Bonnie for initially refusing to help him escape. Kai Parker was charming and dangerous in equal measure, his boyish smile hiding a complete absence of empathy or conscience. He'd been born without the ability to generate his own magic. Ed Taichi, Siphoner, could only steal power from other supernatural sources. This deficiency had made him worthless in the eyes of his coven, particularly because he was supposed to merge with his twin sister Jo in a ritual that would determine which of them would lead the Gemini Coven. The merge, Kai explained with disturbing casualness, as if discussing the weather rather than a death sentence. It's a Gemini tradition. When twins turn 22, they merge their consciousness into one body. The stronger twin survives and absorbs the weaker twin's magic. The loser ceases to exist. My father was grooming Jo to win, to lead the coven, which meant I was supposed to die. So I decided to change the game. His solution had been to murder 4 of his younger siblings, to make himself the only viable option for the merge, to force his family to accept him despite his deficiencies. The Gemini Coven had responded by creating a prison world and trapping him there, removing him from reality entirely, rather than allowing him to live in it. Now Kai was free, and he wanted what he'd always wanted, to merge with Jo, to absorb her magic, to become the leader of the Gemini Coven by force. The fact that Jo had built a life in the years since his imprisonment, had become a doctor, had fallen in love with Alaric Saltzman, and was carrying his children, twins of course, because Gemini magic demanded twins, meant nothing to Kai. He saw only what he wanted, what he'd been denied, and he would take it regardless of who got hurt in the process. But first, he wanted revenge on Bonnie for refusing to help him escape the prison world initially, for choosing Damon over him, for making him feel the sting of rejection and abandonment. Kai studied the people Bonnie loved, looking for the perfect way to hurt her, to make her suffer the way he'd suffered alone in his frozen world. He settled on Elena. The spell Kai crafted was elegant in its cruelty, designed to create maximum pain for everyone involved. He linked Elena's life force to Bonnie's, creating a magical connection that would keep Elena in enchanted sleep for as long as Bonnie lived. When Bonnie eventually died of natural causes, hopefully decades in the future, Elena would wake up preserved perfectly by the spell, ready to resume her life. It was a curse disguised as a blessing. Elena would survive, would eventually wake up, but she would miss decades of her life. She would sleep through her 20s and 30s and 40s, would wake up middle-aged or elderly, would find that everyone she knew had changed beyond recognition while she remained frozen in time. And Bonnie would have to live with the knowledge that her very existence was keeping Elena asleep, that the only way to free her best friend was to die. The guilt would be crushing. The awareness that every day Bonnie lived was another day Elena lost. Kai was forcing Bonnie to choose between her own life and Elena's consciousness, knowing that no matter what she chose, the pain would be excruciating. The spell hit Elena without warning, a wave of magical exhaustion that pulled her down into darkness with inexorable force. She was at the Salvatore boarding house, talking with Damon about their future, about the possibility of him taking the cure and becoming human so they could grow old together. One moment, she was smiling, planning, imagining a life that included children and grandchildren and peaceful mortality. The next moment, her eyes were rolling back, her body going limp, sleep claiming her with supernatural totality. Damon caught her before she hit the floor, his vampire speed the only thing preventing her from cracking her skull on the hardwood. Elena. His voice was sharp with alarm. Elena, wake up. Come on, wake up. But Elena didn't wake up. Her breathing remained steady and slow. Her heartbeat strong, but her consciousness completely inaccessible. She looked peaceful, like she was simply sleeping deeply, but no amount of shaking or shouting could rouse her. Bonnie arrived within minutes, drawn by Damon's panicked phone call, and she understood immediately what had happened. She could feel the spell, could sense the magical connection binding her life to Elena's sleep. Kai had done this, had cast this curse as revenge, as punishment, as a demonstration of his power and his willingness to hurt anyone who crossed him. I can't break it, Bonnie said, her voice hollow with horror and guilt. The spell is too strong, too complex, is woven into both of us. The only way to wake Elena is for me to die. Damon's expression went utterly cold, and Bonnie saw murder in his eyes, saw him calculating whether he could kill her, whether ending her life to save Elena was a choice he was capable of making. For a terrible moment, she thought he would do it, thought he would snap her neck without hesitation to bring back the woman he loved. But then Stefan was there, his hand on Damon's shoulder, his voice calm and firm. No, we don't kill Bonnie. We find another way. There is no other way, Damon said, his voice rough with anguish and fury. Elena is asleep, and the only way to wake her is to end Bonnie's life. That's the choice Kai has given us. That's the impossible decision. Then we choose to wait, Stefan said. We choose Bonnie's life over our desires. We protect Elena while she sleeps, and we wait for her to wake up naturally. Damon wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the unfairness of it, wanted to do violence to someone, anyone, to make this right. But he also knew Stefan was right. Killing Bonnie would destroy Elena, would break her heart, would make her hate Damon for choosing her life over her best friends. It would be a betrayal Elena would never forgive, a sin Damon would carry for whatever remained of eternity. So Damon made the hardest choice of his long life. He chose to wait. Elena's goodbye happened before the spell's full effects took hold. In those final moments of Consciousness when she understood what was happening, what Kai had done, what it meant for her future. Bonnie was there, crying, apologizing, begging Elena to forgive her, even though none of this was Bonnie's fault. Damon was there, holding Elena's hand, his face a mask of barely controlled devastation. "How long?" Elena asked, her voice already slurred with approaching sleep. "Bonnie's young and healthy," Damon said, forcing the words out past the grief choking his throat. "She could live another 60 or 70 years, maybe more. Witches sometimes have extended lifespans. 60 or 70 years. Elena would be in her 80s when she woke up, if she woke up at all. She would miss her entire adult life, would sleep through all the experiences that made life worth living. She would never finish college, never become a doctor like her father, never have children, never grow old with Damon the way she'd imagined." "I'm so sorry," Bonnie sobbed. "Elena, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. I should have found a way to stop Kai. Should have seen this coming." "It's not your fault," Elena said firmly, squeezing Bonnie's hand with weakening strength. "Bonnie, listen to me. You don't sacrifice yourself to wake me up. You live. You have an amazing life. You travel and fall in love and do magic and experience everything. Promise me. Promise me you'll live." "I promise," Bonnie whispered, though the words felt like broken glass in her mouth. Elena turned to Damon, memorizing his face, storing every detail for the long sleep ahead. "Wait for me," she said, her eyes already closing, sleep pulling her down into darkness. "Promise me you'll wait, that you'll be there when I wake up." "Always," Damon said, his voice breaking. "I'll be here, Elena. I'll protect you while you sleep. And when you wake up, whenever that is, I'll be waiting. I promise." Then Elena was gone, her consciousness sliding away into enchanted sleep, her body relaxing into Damon's arms. He carried her to a bedroom in the Salvatore boarding house, laid her on the bed with heartbreaking gentleness, and watched her chest rise and fall with the slow, steady breathing of deep sleep. She looked peaceful, beautiful and peaceful, and utterly unreachable. Damon sat beside her bed and began his vigil. He couldn't save her, couldn't wake her, couldn't do anything except protect her while she slept, and wait for the day Bonnie Bennett's life ended, and Eleanor's consciousness returned. The years passed with terrible slowness. Mystic Falls changed around Elena's sleeping form, the town evolving while she remained frozen in time. Caroline married Alaric, helped him raise his daughters, Joe's twins, born just before Kai murdered their mother in his quest for power. Stefan found peace, found purpose, eventually found a way to live with the choices he'd made and the people he'd lost. Damon visited Elena every day, sitting beside her bed, talking to her even though she couldn't hear, telling her about what was happening in the world, about the people who missed her, about how much he loved her and how desperately he wanted her to wake up. "Bonnie's in Paris right now," Damon said one afternoon, 5 years into Eleanor's sleep. "She's studying with a coven there, learning new magic. She's happy, Elena. She's living the life you made her promise to live, and she misses you every single day." He told her about Caroline's daughters, about how they were growing up with magic and attitude in equal measure. He told her about Jeremy, who had left Mystic Falls to escape the supernatural world, who was living in Colorado and trying to build a normal life. He told her about Bonnie's adventures, her romances, her triumphs and failures, and the full, rich life she was living while carrying the guilt of Elena's sleep, and he told her about his own life, which felt hollow without her, which existed in a state of suspended animation not unlike her own. Damon went through the motions of living. He fed, he interacted with people, he occasionally helped with supernatural crises, but his heart remained in that bedroom with the sleeping girl who held it. I took the cure, Damon told Elena on the 10th anniversary of her sleep. I found a way to extract it from your blood without waking you, without breaking the spell. I'm human now, Elena. I'm aging. Not as fast as you will when you wake up, but it's happening. I wanted to be human when you opened your eyes. I wanted us to have that future you imagined, growing old together, having a normal life. He paused, studying her face, looking for any sign that she could hear him, that his words were reaching her somewhere in the depths of her enchanted sleep. But she remained still and peaceful, lost in whatever dreams the spell allowed her. The world is different now, Damon continued. Technology has changed everything. There are phones that can do anything, cars that drive themselves, medicine that seems like magic even to someone who's seen actual magic. When you wake up, you're going to have a lot to catch up on. But I'll help you. I'll be there to explain everything, to help you navigate whatever the world has become. More years passed. 15, 20, 25. Damon aged slowly, his human body showing the passage of time in ways his vampire body never had. Grey appeared in his hair. Lines formed round his eyes. His movements became slightly less fluid, slightly more careful. Bonnie visited when she could, bringing news from her travels, her adventures. Her life lived in defiance of the guilt that dogged her. She was in her 40s now, still beautiful, still powerful, still carrying the weight of knowing her best friend slept because she lived. I'm sorry I'm not dead yet, Bonnie said one visit, the words bitter and honest. I'm sorry Elena is still sleeping. Sometimes I think about ending it, about choosing her consciousness over my life. But I promised her I'd live, and I'm trying to honor that promise. She wouldn't want you to die for her, Damon said. She'd want you to have the life you're having. That's why she made you promise. Caroline's daughters grew up and had their own children. Jeremy got married, had kids, built the normal family he'd always craved. Stefan found his own peace, his own ending, his own rest after centuries of struggle. The world turned, time marched forward, and Elena slept through all of it, preserved perfectly by Kai's spell, waiting for the day Bonnie's heart would stop and set her free. Damon never left, never moved on, never stopped waiting. He grew older, his human body aging toward the end that mortality guaranteed, and still he kept his vigil beside Elena's bed. He had promised to wait, and Damon Salvatore kept his promises. I don't know how much longer I have, Damon told Elena on what would be one of his final visits. I'm getting old, Elena. I'm dying, actually. Human bodies don't last forever. But I'll be here as long as I can. And when I can't be here anymore, Caroline has promised to watch over you. You'll never be alone. I swear it. He reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her human skin, the steady pulse at her wrist that proved she was alive even if she couldn't wake. I love you, Damon said. I've loved you since the moment I met you, and I'll love you beyond death, beyond everything. Wait for me on the other side, okay? When this is all over, when both our lives have run their course, wait for me. We'll find each other again. The spell held. Elena slept, and the world continued its endless turning, waiting for the day when Bonnie Bennett would die, and Elena Gilbert would finally open her eyes. The world changed while Elena slept. Technology advanced in ways that would have seemed like science fiction during her human years. Mystic Falls evolved, its supernatural secrets becoming legends, its founding families dispersing or dying out. Caroline's daughters grew into powerful witches, had children of their own, built lives that stretched across decades. Jeremy lived a full human life in Colorado, married and raised a family far from vampires and magic, eventually passing away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by grandchildren who never knew about the supernatural world that had claimed his youth. And Bonnie Bennett lived. She traveled the world, mastering magic in a dozen different traditions. She fell in love, had her heart broken, fell in love again. She fought battles and saved lives and made mistakes and learned from them. She lived fully and completely, carrying the weight of Elena's sleep like a stone around her neck, but refusing to let that guilt consume her entirely. 63 years after Eleanor closed her eyes, Bonnie Bennett made her choice. The final battle came without warning, erupting from hell itself when Catherine Pierce, vengeful even in death, found a way to drag Mystic Falls into destruction. Catherine, who had died human after forcing the cure down Eleanor's throat, who had spent years in supernatural purgatory growing more twisted and bitter, orchestrated an apocalypse designed to destroy everything Eleanor had ever loved. Bonnie stood at the center of the conflict, using her magic to seal the hellfire, to push it back, to save the town where she'd grown up and the people who remained. She was 80 years old, her hair white, her face lined with decades of living, but her magic burned as bright as it ever had, perhaps brighter for all the years of experience behind it. "I can stop this," Bonnie said to Caroline, who stood beside her, looking exactly as she had 63 years ago, frozen at vampire perfection, while her best friend had aged into elderly wisdom. "I can save everyone, but I won't survive it." Caroline's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Bonnie, no. There has to be another way. There's always another way." "Not this time," Bonnie said gently, taking Caroline's cold hands in her own weathered ones. "This time, the only way to stop the hellfire is to channel all my magic, all my life force, and use it to seal the breach permanently. It's okay, Caroline. I'm ready. I've lived a long, full life. I've done everything I wanted to do. And Elena can finally wake up." "She's going to hate that you died for her," Caroline said, her voice breaking. "No," Bonnie said with certainty. "She's going to understand that I lived for her first, that I kept my promise, that I had 63 beautiful years because she made me swear I would. This isn't a sacrifice, Caroline. This is a completion. This is me finishing the story we started together all those years ago." Bonnie released the spell with a whisper and a prayer, channeling every ounce of magic she possessed into sealing the hellfire forever. The power burned through her like lightning, like fire, like every spell she'd ever cast concentrated into one final act of salvation. She felt her life force draining, her heart slowing, her consciousness beginning to fade. And in the moment before death claimed her, Bonnie smiled, because she'd kept her promise. She'd lived, and now Elena could too. The spell broke with Bonnie's final heartbeat. In the Salvatore crypt, where she'd been carefully preserved for over 6 decades, Elena Gilbert took a gasping breath and opened her eyes. The first thing she felt was confusion. The last thing she remembered was saying goodbye to Damon, to Bonnie, to everyone she loved, accepting that she would sleep for decades while life continued without her. But now she was awake, her mind sharp and alert, her body feeling strange and unfamiliar after so long in magical stasis. Elena sat up slowly, her muscles protesting the movement, and looked around the crypt that had been her bedroom for 63 years. Everything was exactly as she remembered. The bed, the flowers that someone had kept fresh, the photos on the walls showing people she loved frozen in moments of happiness. Then the door opened and Caroline walked in, looking exactly the same as the day Elena had closed her eyes. And Elena understood immediately that decades had passed, that the world she'd woken to was vastly different from the one she'd left. Caroline. Elena's voice was rough from disuse, cracking on her friend's name. How long was I asleep? 63 years, Caroline said, moving to Elena's side, helping her stand on legs that trembled with weakness. You've been asleep for 63 years, Elena, and Bonnie died this morning. She saved everyone, stopped Catherine's final attempt to destroy Mystic Falls, and the spell broke with her last breath. Elena felt grief crash over her like a wave, sharp and immediate, despite the decades that separated her from the Bonnie she'd known. Her best friend was dead, had lived an entire lifetime and died saving people, had carried the weight of Elena's sleep for over 6 decades, and had chosen to end it not through suicide but through sacrifice. I need to see her, Elena said. I need to say goodbye. They held the funeral 3 days later, giving Elena time to adjust to being awake, to process the magnitude of what had happened during her sleep. Bonnie was buried in the Mystic Falls Cemetery beside her grandmother, her mother, the Bennett witches who had come before her. The funeral was small. Caroline and her family, a few distant relatives, and Elena, who stood at the graveside feeling like a ghost from another era. Thank you, Elena whispered to Bonnie's casket. Thank you for living. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for everything. After the funeral, Caroline took Elena to see what had become of the people she'd known. Jeremy was dead, had been for nearly 15 years, buried beside his wife in Colorado. Alaric was dead, had lived well into his 90s before passing peacefully. Stefan was dead, had sacrificed himself years ago to save Damon, and had found peace in whatever came after. And Damon? Elena asked, her heart in her throat. Caroline's expression was complicated, sad and hopeful in equal measure. He took the cure, extracted it from your blood while you slept, so he could be human when you woke up. He aged, Elena. He lived as a human for decades, waiting for you. But time catches up with everyone eventually. Elena felt her heart break. She'd slept through Damon's human life, through all the years they could have spent together. Is he dead? Not yet, Caroline said gently. But he's old, Elena, in his 80s. His health is failing, but he's still here, still waiting for you. They drove to a small house on the outskirts of Mystic Falls, a place Damon had bought decades ago to be close to Elena's sleeping form. Caroline knocked on the door, and it opened to reveal an elderly man with white hair and a face lined with age, but eyes that Elena would have recognized anywhere. Damon, Elena breathed, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Elena, Damon said, his voice rough with emotion and the weakness of age. You're awake. You're finally awake. Elena crossed the distance between them, and wrapped her arms around him carefully, aware of how fragile he'd become, how human mortality had worn him down. He felt different, lighter, weaker, his heartbeat irregular and struggling. But he was still Damon, still the person she loved. "I'm sorry," Elena said. "I'm sorry I slept through your life. I'm sorry we lost all those years." "Don't be," Damon said, leading her inside to a house filled with photos and memories. "I got to protect you. I got to keep my promise. And now you're awake, and we have whatever time is left. That's enough, Elena. That's more than enough." They had 3 months. 3 months of Elena catching up on 63 years of history, of learning to navigate a world transformed by technology and social change. 3 months of sitting with Damon, holding his hand, talking about everything and nothing. 3 months of falling in love all over again with a man who had waited a lifetime for her to open her eyes. Damon's health declined rapidly, his human body worn out from decades of living, from the strain of aging after over a century of vampiric preservation. But he faced death with courage and even humor, making jokes about finally getting to rest, about being tired of being responsible. "I'll find you on the other side," Damon promised Elena on his final day. His breathing labored, his hand weak in hers. "Stefan's waiting for me. Your family is waiting for you. When your time comes, whenever that is, we'll all be together again." "I love you," Elena said, her voice breaking. "I've always loved you." "I know," Damon said, smiling despite the pain. "That's what made waiting worthwhile." He died peacefully that night, Elena beside him, Caroline standing witness. And Elena understood that she'd been given a gift, not the decades of life she'd slept through, but these final months with Damon. This chance to say goodbye properly, to tell him all the things that had gone unsaid before Kai's spell claimed her. Elena returned to medical school. At 81 years old, she enrolled at Whitmore University to finish the degree she'd started over 6 decades ago. The other students thought she was eccentric, this elderly woman attending classes with people 60 years her junior. But Elena didn't care. She'd promised herself she would become a doctor like her father, and she intended to keep that promise. She graduated at 85, became Dr. Elena Gilbert Salvatore in a ceremony that Caroline attended, with tears of pride streaming down her face. Elena opened a free clinic in Mystic Falls, using Damon's considerable inheritance to fund medical care for people who couldn't afford it, spending her final years helping people, healing instead of hurting. The years passed quickly now, without the weight of supernatural drama, without the constant threat of death. Elena lived simply and fully, surrounded by Caroline's extended family, by the town she'd always called home, by memories of everyone she'd loved and lost. At 93, Eleanor's health began to fail. Her heart, which had stopped and started so many times, drowned at Wickery Bridge, stopped by vampire transformation, stopped again by humanity restoration, finally began to wear out. She accepted it with grace, understanding that mortality was a gift, that endings gave meaning to the time that came before. Caroline sat with her in the hospital, holding her hand the way Elena had once held Damon's. "I'm going to miss you," Caroline said, vampire tears sliding down her eternally young face. "You've been my best friend for over a century. I don't know how to exist without you." "You'll figure it out," Elena said gently. "You're strong, Caroline, stronger than you've ever given yourself credit for. And I'll see you again someday." when your story ends and the next chapter begins. Do you think there is a next chapter? Caroline asked. An afterlife, peace, whatever comes after. I know there is, Elena said with certainty. I can feel them waiting. My parents, Jenna, John, Bonnie, Damon, Stefan. They're all there, Caroline, and I'm ready to join them. Elena Gilbert died on a spring morning, the sun streaming through her hospital window, Caroline's hand in hers. She closed her eyes peacefully, her last thoughts of the people she'd loved, the life she'd lived, the journey that had taken her from ordinary teenager to supernatural survivor to human once more. And when she opened her eyes again, she was standing in a place that felt like home, though she'd never been there before. The Gilbert Lake house materialized around her, warm and bright, filled with the scent of her mother's cooking and the sound of her father's laughter. Jenna was there, young and smiling, rushing forward to embrace her. Elena, oh my God, you're here. John was there, looking proud and peaceful in ways he never had in life. Her parents were there, Miranda and Grayson, unchanged by death, their love as fierce as she remembered. And Damon was there, young again, his eyes bright with mischief and devotion, holding out his hand to her. Welcome home, Elena. She took his hand and felt complete for the first time since Wickery Bridge, since the accident that had started everything. This was peace. This was rest. This was the reward for a life lived fully despite impossible circumstances, for choosing love over fear, for fighting through darkness toward light. Elena Gilbert's story was complete. From tragedy to transformation, from death to life and back again. She had survived it all. And now, finally, she was home. And so, Elena Gilbert's journey comes full circle. From the girl who lost everything on Wickery Bridge to the woman who found herself through darkness and transformation. She was born human, died human, became vampire, became human again, and finally found peace beyond all of it. Her story was never about what she was, but about who she chose to be in the face of impossible circumstances. She loved fiercely, even when love brought pain. She fought courageously, even when the battles seemed unwinnable. She chose compassion over cruelty, hope over despair, connection over isolation. She was a doppelganger, yes, a cosmic duplicate created for ancient purposes. But she was also Elena, wholly herself, defined not by supernatural destiny, but by the choices she made every single day. The losses shaped her, but didn't break her. The transformations changed her, but didn't destroy her. And in the end, she found what everyone seeks: peace, love, reunion with those who had gone before. Sleep well, gentle dreamer. Elena's story is complete, her journey finished, her rest earned, and yours continues tomorrow in whatever form it takes, in whatever choices you make. May you face your darkness with her courage, love with her devotion, and live with her fierce determination to make every moment matter. Good night.